Hello, friends. Welcome to the Sleep Aliens. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The air of the Nevada desert carried that distinct silence only felt after midnight. The date was March 17, 1987, and Captain Noah Briggs sat in the cockpit of his F-15C Eagle, flying 22,000 feet above the restricted airspace surrounding Groom Lake. The instruments softly illuminated the endless darkness ahead. Fuel levels were stable, altitude steady. The radio frequency was tuned to the control tower at Nellis Air Force Base, 40 miles to the south. Below, the desert stretched in every direction, indistinguishable from a dark ocean except for the lights of Las Vegas on the western horizon. Here, above the haze and dust, the stars shone brightly. Briggs had been flying patrols in this area for 3 years and knew every restricted zone, every dry lake bed, and every ridge like the back of his hand. Sector 12 was one of the quietest areas. It was the buffer zone between Nellis Range and the secret facilities further north. Nothing ever happened in Sector 12. Tonight would be different. Viper 2-1, this is range control. Radio check, over. The voice crackled through his headset, calm and routine. It belonged to Senior Airman Elena Ward, the radar operator on duty at the range control station. Briggs had flown dozens of missions with Ward monitoring his path. She was precise, professional, and unflappable. If something unusual showed up on her scope, she would catch it. Range control, Viper 2-1, loud and clear. All systems green, Briggs replied, adjusting his grip on the stick. The F-15 responded with the smooth precision he had come to trust. He glanced at the mission clock. Another 90 minutes before he would turn south and begin his approach to Nellis. Plenty of time to enjoy the solitude. Far below, in a concrete bunker lined with radar screens and communications equipment, Elena Ward sat at her station, watching the green sweep of the radar display as it rotated across the screen. Briggs's aircraft appeared as a bright blip, moving steadily along his assigned route. The rest of the scope was empty. No commercial traffic, no stray aircraft, nothing but the usual clutter from ground returns and atmospheric noise. Ward had been on duty for 6 hours already, and fatigue was beginning to settle into her shoulders. She reached for her coffee mug, found it empty, and set it down with a quiet sigh. Another hour before her relief arrived, she rubbed her eyes and leaned closer to the screen, double-checking the calibration. Everything looked normal. Then, at 01:47 hours, something appeared. It was faint at first, barely distinguishable from the background clutter. A single return, distant and stationary, positioned approximately 42 nautical miles northeast of Briggs's current location. Ward frowned and tapped the screen lightly, as if the gesture might clarify what she was seeing. The return remained. She adjusted the gain, reducing the sensitivity to filter out ground noise. The blip stayed, brighter now, more defined. Viper 2-1, range control. I have a contact at your 1 o'clock, range 42 miles. Altitude unknown, advising you of traffic, Ward said, keeping her voice even. Protocol dictated she inform the pilot of any radar return, regardless of how benign it seemed. Briggs scanned the darkness ahead, his eyes searching for navigation lights or the silhouette of another aircraft. He saw nothing. Range control, Viper 2-1. Negative contact visually. Can you confirm altitude? Ward studied the scope. The contact had no altitude readout, which meant it wasn't broadcasting a transponder signal. That alone was unusual. All military and civilian aircraft in controlled airspace were required to squawk an identification code. This object was not. She switched to secondary radar, hoping to pull more information. Nothing. The return was primary only, meaning it was reflecting the radar beam but providing no additional data. Viper 2-1. Negative altitude data. Contact is not squawking. Appears stationary at this time. Briggs felt the first flutter of unease. Stationary at 42 miles meant it was either on the ground or hovering, but the desert floor in that area was relatively flat. If it were on the ground, the radar return would be masked by terrain clutter. For it to show up this clearly, it had to be airborne. Range control, request vector to intercept. I'll take a look. There was a pause. Ward hesitated, her finger hovering over the communications key. Protocol for unknown contacts in restricted airspace was clear: identify and report. But something about the return made her uneasy. It was too steady, too distinct. She had seen false returns before, caused by weather phenomena or equipment glitches. This felt different. Viper 2-1, stand by. Ward keyed the internal line to the duty officer, Captain Lawrence Hale, who sat at the supervisory console 10 feet away. Sir, I have an unidentified contact in Sector 12. Primary return only, no transponder. Captain Briggs is requesting vector to intercept. Hale looked up from the logbook he was reviewing. How long has it been there? Approximately 30 seconds, stationary. Hale stood and crossed to her station, leaning over her shoulder to study the scope. The blip pulsed softly with each sweep of the radar. Any civilian traffic filed through that area tonight? Negative, sir. Sector 12 is a no-fly zone. Commercial routes are 50 miles west. Hale rubbed his jaw, thinking. Unidentified contacts were rare, but not unheard of. Occasionally, a private pilot would stray into restricted airspace, usually with a broken radio or faulty navigation equipment. But those cases always involved movement. This object was motionless. Clear him for intercept. Keep a close watch on it. If it moves, I want to know immediately. Ward nodded and keyed the radio. Viper 2-1, you are cleared to intercept. Turn right heading 045. Maintain altitude 2000. Advise when contact is visual. Viper 2-1, turning right to 045. Briggs banked the F-15 smoothly, feeling the G-forces press him into his seat as the jet responded. The stars tilted overhead, and then the aircraft steadied on its new heading. He throttled up slightly, increasing his speed to 400 knots. At this rate, he would close the distance in less than 6 minutes. As he flew, Briggs scanned the darkness ahead, his eyes adjusting to the faint starlight. The desert below remained invisible, a void of blackness. He activated his onboard radar, watching the display as it painted a picture of the airspace ahead. The contact appeared almost immediately, a solid return at 40 miles and closing. Range control, Viper 2-1. I have the contact on radar. Still no visual. Ward's voice came back, tighter now. Viper 2-1. Contact is still stationary. Range now 38 miles. Briggs felt his pulse quicken. 38 miles. At this distance, if the object were large enough, he should be able to see it, especially if it were emitting any light. But the sky ahead remained dark. He adjusted his night vision goggles, pulling them down over his eyes. The world turned green, the stars becoming sharp pinpoints against the void. Still nothing. Range 35 miles, Ward reported. Her voice had lost its routine calm. She was leaning forward now, her eyes locked on the scope. The contact remained perfectly still, as if anchored in the sky. Briggs's radar pinged steadily, the return growing stronger with each sweep. 30 miles. 28. 25. He should be seeing something by now. A strobe light. The reflection of starlight on metal. Anything. But the darkness ahead was absolute. And then, at 12 seconds past 0149 hours, the object moved. Ward saw it first. The blip shifted position on the radar screen, not gradually, but in a single jump. One moment it was stationary at 24 miles northeast. The next moment, it was at 18 miles, as if it had teleported 6 miles in the span of a single radar sweep. Ward's breath caught in her throat. Viper 2-1, contact has moved. Range now 18 miles. It jumped 6 miles in under 2 seconds. Briggs heard the disbelief in her voice. He checked his own radar. She was right. The contact was now much closer, and it had not traveled the distance between the 2 points. It had simply appeared there. Range control confirmed that last report. His voice was steady, but his grip on the stick had tightened. Confirmed. Object relocated instantaneously. No intermediate positions detected. That was impossible. Radar sweeps updated every 2 to 3 seconds. Even the fastest aircraft on Earth could not cover 6 miles in that time without appearing on at least one intermediate sweep. This object had defied the basic laws of physics. Before Briggs could respond, the object moved again. This time, Ward watched it happen in real time. The blip vanished from 18 miles and reappeared at 29 miles, now southwest of Briggs's position. It had not only jumped again, but changed direction entirely. Viper 2-1, contact is now at your 7 o'clock. Range 29 miles. Repeat, it is relocated behind you. Briggs executed a hard left turn, pulling the F-15 into a steep bank. The G-forces compressed his body, and the horizon spun. He rolled out on a new heading, his radar searching for the contact. It appeared immediately, now at 26 miles and closing. I have it, range 26 miles, it's moving toward me now. Ward's hands moved quickly across her console, trying to extract more data. Airspeed, heading, altitude, anything that might help her understand what she was looking at. But the radar gave her nothing. Just a primary return, solid and bright, defying every rule she had been taught. Object's ascent angle is 24 degrees, Ward said, her voice tight. But speed, system cannot compute. Captain Hale was standing beside her now, staring at the scope. What do you mean it can't compute? Sir, the system is designed to track objects up to Mach 5. Whatever this is, it's moving faster than that. Hale felt the blood drain from his face. Mach 5 was over 3,000 miles per hour. Only experimental hypersonic vehicles moved that fast, and they certainly didn't make instantaneous position changes. He grabbed the phone to alert higher command. Briggs, meanwhile, was trying to get a visual on the object. His radar showed it climbing rapidly, now at 30,000 feet and accelerating. He pulled the nose of the F-15 up, straining to follow, but the object was already out of reach. It climbed with the same impossible speed it had demonstrated horizontally, vanishing upward into the night. Range control, I've lost it. No radar contact, no visual. Ward stared at her screen. The blip was gone. She adjusted the gain, expanded the search radius, switched frequencies. Nothing. The object had simply vanished. For a long moment, the radio was silent. Briggs circled at 25,000 feet, scanning the sky in all directions. His heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding his system. He had been a fighter pilot for 12 years. He had flown in combat. He had intercepted Soviet bombers during the Cold War, but he had never encountered anything like this. Viper 2-1, range control. Contact is no longer on scope. Last known position was directly above you at estimated 60,000 feet, climbing. 60,000 feet. The edge of space. Nothing Briggs was flying could reach that altitude. He felt a deep, primal unease settle over him. Whatever that object was, it had toyed with him. It had demonstrated capabilities that no human-made aircraft possessed. Range control requesting clearance to return to base. There was a pause. Then Hale's voice came through, replacing Ward's. Viper 2-1, this is range control actual. You are cleared to return to Nellis. Maintain current altitude and heading 180. Do not discuss this incident on open channels. Acknowledge. Viper 2-1 acknowledged. Heading 180, maintaining altitude. Briggs turned the F-15 south, his hands moving through the motions automatically. His mind, however, was elsewhere. He replayed the encounter in his head, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. The object had known he was there. It had waited until he was close, then moved. Not fled. Moved, as if testing him, as if observing. Below, in the bunker, Ward was writing down the exact times and positions from her radar log. Hale stood over her, his face grim. I want every second of this recorded. Exact coordinates, times, speeds, everything. Yes, sir. Ward's hands were shaking slightly as she transcribed the data. She had been trained to remain calm under pressure, but this was different. This was beyond her training, beyond her understanding. Hale picked up the secure line to Nellis Command. This is range control. We have an event. Unknown aerial object, Sector 12. Fast mover. No transponder. Pilot attempted intercept. Object demonstrated anomalous flight characteristics. Requesting immediate debrief upon pilot's return. The voice on the other end was clipped and efficient. Understood. Stand by for further instructions. Do not log this incident in standard reports. Await classified debrief team. Hale replaced the receiver slowly. He looked at Ward. You heard nothing tonight, understood? Ward met his eyes. Understood, sir. But even as she said the words, she knew she would never forget what she had seen on that radar screen. The way the object had moved, defying logic, defying physics. The way it had appeared and vanished as if the laws that governed the rest of the world simply did not apply to it. Briggs landed at Nellis 40 minutes later. As he taxied toward the hangar, he saw a black sedan waiting on the tarmac, along with 3 men in civilian clothes. He shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit, his flight suit damp with sweat despite the cool night air. One of the men approached him. Captain Briggs? Yes. Come with us, please. They led him to a windowless room deep inside the operations building. A tape recorder sat on the table. For the next 2 hours, Briggs recounted every detail of the encounter. The men asked questions, their faces expressionless. They wrote notes. They asked him to repeat certain details, and when it was over, they told him what he already expected to hear. This incident is classified. You will not discuss it with anyone, not your squadron mates, not your family, not even other personnel with security clearance unless specifically authorized. Violation of this order will result in court-martial. Do you understand? Yes, sir. You are dismissed. Briggs walked out into the pre-dawn darkness, his mind numb. He looked up at the sky, at the stars beginning to fade as the first light of morning crept over the horizon. Somewhere up there, beyond the reach of his aircraft, beyond the reach of human understanding, something had been watching. And for a few minutes, it had let him know. 3 days passed before Briggs flew another mission. During that time, he moved through his duties like a man in a fog. He attended briefings, reviewed flight plans, and conducted pre-flight checks with his usual precision. But his mind was elsewhere. At night, he lay awake in his quarters, replaying the encounter over and over. The way the object had jumped across the sky, the way it had climbed beyond his reach, the absolute silence of it. He wanted to talk to someone, anyone, but the weight of the classification order kept his mouth shut. He passed Elena Ward in the corridor on the second day. Their eyes met for just a moment, and he saw in her face the same haunted look he felt in his own. They said nothing. They walked past each other as if they were strangers. On the fourth day, Briggs was summoned to the office of Colonel Richard Vasquez, the commander of the 57th Fighter Wing. Vasquez was a career officer, a Vietnam veteran with 3 decades of service. He had flown over 200 combat missions and earned a reputation for being unshakable. When Briggs entered the office and saw the expression on Vasquez's face, he realized that even the colonel was shaken. "Close the door, Captain." Briggs obeyed and stood at attention. "Sit down." Briggs sat. Vasquez leaned back in his chair, studying him in silence for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "I've read the debrief report. I've also spoken with the intelligence officers who interviewed you. They tell me you handled yourself well out there." "Thank you, sir." "They also tell me that what you encountered is not the first incident of its kind, nor will it be the last." Briggs felt his pulse quicken. "Sir?" Vasquez opened a file on his desk and slid it across to Briggs. "Read." Briggs opened the file. Inside were radar logs, incident reports, and pilot testimonies. Each one described encounters with unidentified objects exhibiting flight characteristics that defied known technology. Some reports were recent. Others dated back decades. One, from 1975, described an object that had paced an SR-71 Blackbird over the Pacific at speeds exceeding Mach 3. Another, from 1981, detailed a radar contact that had descended from 80,000 feet to sea level in under 4 seconds. "These are all classified," Vasquez said, "and they all have one thing in common: no explanation, no identification, no closure." Briggs closed the file and looked up. "What are they, sir?" "I don't know." Vasquez's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "And that's the problem. We control the most advanced airspace on the planet. We have radar systems that can track a bird at 30 miles. We have pilots trained to intercept anything that flies. And yet, these objects appear and disappear at will. They outmaneuver our best aircraft. They ignore our attempts to communicate. And when we try to get answers, we're told to keep our mouths shut and move on." Briggs said nothing. He didn't know what to say. "I'm telling you this," Vasquez continued, "because I want you to understand that what you experienced was real. It was documented, and it was not unique. You are not crazy. You are not mistaken. But you are also not going to get answers, not from me, not from anyone." "Why not, sir?" Vasquez leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Because there are people above me, above this base, above this entire command structure, who have decided that the public, and most of the military, cannot be trusted with the truth. Whether that truth is experimental aircraft from another country, secret programs from our own government, or something else entirely, I don't know. What I do know is that asking questions gets you reassigned, pushing for answers gets you grounded, and talking to the press gets you court-martialed." Briggs felt a chill run down his spine. "So we just pretend it didn't happen. We do our jobs, Captain. We protect this airspace, and when something like this happens, we report it up the chain and let someone else worry about it." Briggs stood, his jaw tight. "With all due respect, sir, that's not good enough." Vasquez met his gaze. "I know, but it's all we have." Briggs left the office feeling more unsettled than when he had entered. He walked back to his quarters, changed into civilian clothes, and drove off base. He needed to think. He needed to be somewhere other than the confines of Nellis, where every wall seemed to carry the weight of secrets. He drove east, into the desert, following a dirt road that led to a ridge overlooking the test range. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He parked the truck and climbed out, walking to the edge of the ridge. Below, the desert stretched endlessly, empty and silent. For the first time in days, Briggs allowed himself to fully process what had happened. The object had been real. It had been there, on radar, visible to multiple systems. Elena Ward had seen it. Captain Hale had seen it. The data logs would confirm it. And yet, the official response had been silence, not investigation, not curiosity, just silence. He thought about the file Vasquez had shown him. Decades of incidents, dozens of encounters, and not one of them had been explained. That meant one of two things. Either the military genuinely did not know what these objects were, or they knew and were deliberately concealing the truth. Briggs wasn't sure which possibility frightened him more. As the last light faded from the sky, he heard the distant rumble of jet engines. He looked up and saw a pair of F-15s on patrol, their navigation lights blinking against the darkening sky. He wondered if the pilots in those cockpits had ever encountered something like he had. He wondered how many others had been told to stay silent. He stayed on the ridge until the stars came out, the same stars he had been flying beneath that night. Somewhere up there, beyond the reach of radar and human understanding, something was watching. And it knew more about us than we knew about it. Meanwhile, back at Nellis, Elena Ward sat in the range control bunker, staring at a blank radar screen. Her shift had just begun, and the airspace was quiet. But she couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment, another blip would appear. Another impossible object. She had tried to move on. She had filed her report, spoken to the debrief team, and signed the non-disclosure agreement without hesitation. But at night, when she closed her eyes, she saw the radar scope. She saw the object jumping across the screen, defying every principle of aerodynamics she had ever learned. Ward had grown up in a military family. Her father had been an Air Force mechanic. Her brother was a Marine. She had been taught to trust the system, to believe that the military existed to protect and inform. But now, she wasn't so sure. The debrief team had not been interested in understanding the object. They had been interested in containing the information. That distinction troubled her deeply. On the fifth night after the incident, Ward was running a routine systems diagnostic when she noticed something odd. She pulled up the archived radar logs from the night of March 17th and found that several minutes of data were missing. The logs jumped from 0146 hours to 0053 hours, skipping the exact window when the object had appeared. Ward frowned and checked the backup files. They were missing too. She searched the maintenance logs for any record of a system malfunction or data corruption. Nothing. The files had been deliberately deleted. Looking for something? The voice came from behind her. Ward turned to see Captain Hale standing in the doorway, his arms crossed. "Sir, the radar logs from the incident, they've been erased." "I know." Ward stared at him. "Sir, those logs are official records. They can't just be erased. They can when someone higher up orders it." Hale stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "Listen to me, Ward. You need to stop digging. You filed your report. You did your job. Now let it go." "But, sir," "That's an order, Airman." Ward's jaw clenched, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." Hale's expression softened slightly. "I know this is hard. I've been in this job for 15 years and I've seen things I can't explain. But pushing against the system won't get you answers. It'll just get you transferred to some remote radar station in Alaska where you'll spend the rest of your career tracking weather balloons. Is that what you want?" "No, sir." "Then drop it." Hale left, and Ward sat alone in the bunker, the empty radar screen glowing softly in front of her. She thought about the missing files. She thought about the order to stay silent. And she thought about the object, still out there, somewhere, beyond the reach of radar and beyond the reach of truth. 2 weeks later, Briggs was reassigned. He received orders to transfer to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, effective immediately. No explanation was given. When he asked his commanding officer, he was told simply that his skills were needed elsewhere. Briggs packed his belongings and said goodbye to the few friends he had made at Nellis. On his last day, he drove out to the ridge one more time. The desert was quiet, the sky clear. He stood at the edge and looked out over Sector 12, the restricted zone where his life had changed. He thought about the object. He thought about the silence that had followed. And he thought about the hundreds, maybe thousands of other pilots and radar operators who had experienced the same thing, only to be told to forget. But Briggs knew he would never forget. None of them would. The truth, whatever it was, remained out there. Hidden. Classified. Buried beneath layers of secrecy and denial. As he drove away from Nellis for the last time, Briggs glanced in the rearview mirror. The base receded into the distance, swallowed by the desert. He wondered if he would ever learn the truth. He wondered if anyone would. And somewhere deep in a bunker beneath the Nevada desert, the radar logs from March 17, 1987, sat in a locked file cabinet, stamped with a single word in red ink: classified. Years passed. Briggs completed his assignment at Langley and eventually retired from the Air Force with the rank of major. He moved to a small town in Montana, bought a cabin near the mountains, and tried to build a life away from the secrecy and silence that had defined his final years in the military. But the memory of that night over Sector 12 never left him. He kept in touch with a few former squadron mates, though none of them knew about his encounter. The classification order still bound him, even in retirement. He had signed papers, taken oaths, and accepted the burden of silence. But as the years went by, that burden grew heavier. In 2003, Briggs received an unexpected email. It was from Elena Ward. "Major Briggs," it began. "I don't know if you remember me. I was the radar operator on duty the night of March 17, 1987. I've spent the last 16 years trying to forget what I saw on that scope. But I can't, and I don't think you can either. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to meet. No recordings, no publicity. Just two people who witnessed something we were told to bury. Please consider it. Elena Ward." Briggs stared at the screen for a long time. Part of him wanted to delete the message and move on. But a larger part, the part that had carried the weight of that night for 16 years, wanted answers, wanted validation, wanted someone to acknowledge that what they had experienced was real. He replied, "I remember. Let's meet." They arranged to meet at a diner in Reno, Nevada, a neutral location far from any military installation. Briggs drove down from Montana, a 10-hour journey through mountain passes and high desert. When he walked into the diner, he recognized Ward immediately. She had aged, as he had, but her eyes carried the same intensity he remembered from that brief encounter in the corridor at Nellis. They sat in a corner booth, away from the other patrons. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ward broke the silence. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't," Briggs admitted. "I've spent 16 years trying to convince myself it didn't matter. That it was just one night, one incident. But it does matter," Ward said. "And it wasn't just one night." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were printouts, news clippings, and handwritten notes. "After I left the Air Force, I started researching. Quietly. Carefully. I found hundreds of reports, pilots, radar operators, air traffic controllers. all of them describing the same thing: objects that move faster than anything we can build, objects that appear and disappear, objects that defy the laws of physics. Briggs looked through the papers. Some were official military reports that had been declassified. Others were witness statements collected by civilian researchers. A few were anonymous accounts posted on obscure internet forums, but the pattern was unmistakable. The same impossible movements, the same lack of explanation, the same orders to stay silent. "Why are you showing me this?" Briggs asked. "Because I need to know I'm not crazy," Ward said. Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in it. "I need to know that what I saw was real, that it mattered, that it wasn't just a glitch or a mistake or some classified project I wasn't cleared to know about." Briggs met her eyes. "It was real. We both saw it. The radar logs confirmed it. Whatever that object was, it was there." Ward let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Thank you." They talked for hours, comparing notes, filling in gaps in each other's memories. Ward described how the radar logs had been erased, how Captain Hale had warned her to stop asking questions. Briggs told her about the file Colonel Vasquez had shown him, the decades of similar incidents, the pattern of denial and suppression. "Do you think it's ours?" Ward asked. "Some kind of secret program?" Briggs shook his head. "I don't know. If it is, it's technology so far beyond anything publicly known that it might as well be alien. And if it's not ours, then the question becomes, whose is it?" They both knew the answer that neither of them wanted to say aloud. If the object wasn't American, and wasn't Russian or Chinese, then it came from somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the boundaries of human technology. "What do we do with this?" Ward asked, gesturing to the folder. "Nothing," Briggs said. "We keep it to ourselves. We live our lives, and we hope that someday, someone with more courage than us will ask the right questions and demand the right answers." Ward nodded, though the disappointment was clear on her face. She had hoped for more. Hoped that together they might find a way to break the silence. But Briggs was right. The system was too powerful. The secrecy too entrenched. Two retired military personnel with a story no one wanted to hear would change nothing. They parted ways that afternoon. Briggs drove back to Montana, and Ward returned to her home in New Mexico. They stayed in touch over the years, exchanging occasional emails, sharing new reports and sightings they came across. But they never met again. In 2011, the U.S. government quietly released a trove of declassified documents related to UFO sightings and military encounters. Buried among thousands of pages was a single report from March 1987, describing an unidentified radar contact over the Nevada test range. The report noted that an F-15 pilot had attempted intercept and that the object had demonstrated anomalous flight characteristics. No further details were provided. No pilot name, no radar operator name, just a brief acknowledgement that something had happened. Ward saw the report first and sent it to Briggs with a single line. "We were right." Briggs read the report and felt a strange mix of vindication and anger. Vindication because it proved, at least in some small way, that the encounter had been real. Anger because even this tiny acknowledgement had taken 24 years to surface, and it still told the public almost nothing. He thought about responding to Ward, but he didn't know what to say. So he simply saved the document to his computer and closed the laptop. That night, Briggs stood on the deck of his cabin, looking up at the stars. The Montana sky was vast and clear, the Milky Way stretching overhead like a river of light. He thought about the object he had encountered all those years ago, where it had come from, where it had gone, whether it was still out there watching. He thought about the thousands of other pilots and radar operators who had seen similar things. The ones who had been told to stay silent. The ones who had carried the weight of their encounters for decades, never able to share, never able to seek answers. And he thought about the future, about whether humanity would ever be ready to confront the reality that we are not alone, that the skies above us, the skies we claim to control, are shared with something else, something that operates by rules we don't understand and technology we can't match. Briggs didn't have answers. He wasn't sure anyone did, but he knew that the truth, whatever it was, could not stay buried forever. Secrets have a way of surfacing. Witnesses have a way of speaking out, even when threatened into silence. And the objects, whatever they were, had a way of appearing when least expected. Somewhere, in a secure facility, the original radar logs from March 17, 1987, still existed. The unedited data, the complete timeline, the full record of an event that had been officially minimized and unofficially erased. And someday, perhaps, those logs would be released. Perhaps someone with access would leak them. Perhaps a whistleblower would step forward. Until then, Briggs would live with his memories. He would remember the way the object had moved across the radar screen, defying physics and reason. He would remember the way it had climbed beyond his reach, vanishing into the night. And he would remember the silence that followed, the heavy, oppressive silence that told him more than any official statement ever could. Elena Ward, too, carried her memories. She had left the Air Force and built a career as a civilian air traffic controller, guiding commercial flights through the busy skies over Albuquerque. But late at night, when her shift ended and she walked out into the parking lot, she would sometimes pause and look up. She would scan the sky, searching for movement, for light, for anything that didn't belong. And once, on a clear autumn night in 2015, she saw something. A bright point of light, moving faster than any aircraft she knew, crossing the sky in absolute silence. It was there for only a few seconds before it vanished, leaving no trace. Ward stood frozen, her heart pounding, as the memory of that night in 1987 came flooding back. She pulled out her phone and called Briggs. It was late, past midnight, but he answered on the second ring. "I saw it again," she said, her voice shaking. "Not on radar, visually. It's still out there, Noah." Briggs listened in silence. When she finished, he said quietly, "I know." They talked for a while longer, two people bound by a shared experience that had shaped their lives in ways they could never fully articulate. And when they hung up, they both returned to their lives, carrying the knowledge that whatever they had encountered, it was not gone. It was never gone. It was always there, just beyond the edge of perception, moving through the skies with impunity. The Nevada Test Range remains one of the most heavily monitored and restricted airspaces in the world. Radar stations track every movement. Fighter jets patrol the boundaries. Satellites watch from above. And yet, despite all this surveillance, unidentified objects continue to appear. They move with impossible speed. They vanish without explanation. And the reports, when they surface at all, are buried beneath layers of classification and official denial. In the end, the story of Sector 12 is not about one encounter on one night. It is about a pattern of sightings, encounters, and cover-ups that stretches across decades and continents. It is about the men and women who witnessed these events and were told to stay silent. And it is about the uncomfortable truth that the skies above us, the skies we think we understand, remain a mystery. Noah Briggs passed away in 2019 at the age of 73. In his final years, he had written down his account of the March 1987 encounter, sealing it in an envelope with instructions that it be opened only after his death. His daughter found the envelope among his belongings and, honoring his wishes, made it public. The account went viral. News outlets picked it up. UFO researchers analyzed every detail. Skeptics dismissed it as the confused memories of an aging man. But for those who knew Briggs, who had flown with him, who had trusted him with their lives, the account rang true. Elena Ward is still alive. She lives quietly in New Mexico, rarely speaking about her experience. But when asked, she confirms every detail of Briggs's account. She remembers the radar scope. She remembers the impossible movements. She remembers the orders to stay silent. And she remembers the weight of carrying a truth that the world was not ready to hear. The file on the March 1987 incident remains classified. The original radar logs have never been released. The names of the debrief team members were never disclosed. And the object, whatever it was, has never been explained. But the story endures. It endures in the memories of those who were there. It endures in the declassified documents that hint at a larger truth. And it endures in the knowledge that somewhere, in the vast expanse of the Nevada desert, beneath the endless sky, Sector 12 holds a secret. A secret that continues to elude us. A secret that perhaps we are not yet ready to understand. The night of September 12, 1991, began like any other at Echo Range Testing Facility. The desert air was cool, carrying the faint scent of creosote and dust. Above, the stars burned with that particular intensity found only in the remote corners of Nevada, far from city lights and civilization. Echo Range sat 37 miles northeast of Groom Lake, a small cluster of buildings and equipment sheds surrounded by endless stretches of hardpan and scrub. Brian Cole had been working as a senior electronics technician at Echo Range for 2 years. At 34, he had spent over a decade maintaining radar systems, communications arrays, and power distribution networks for various military installations. Echo Range was different from his previous postings. Here, questions were discouraged. Curiosity was a liability. You did your job, logged your hours, and went home without discussing what you saw or heard. Cole's shift began at midnight. He clocked in at the main facility building, a low concrete structure with small windows and heavy steel doors. The facility hummed with the constant background noise of cooling systems, generator turbines, and electronic equipment. Most of the staff worked day shifts. Night duty fell to a skeleton crew: Cole, 2 security personnel, and whoever held the supervisory role that week. Tonight, that supervisor was Major Samantha Reeves. Reeves was career Air Force, a logistics officer with 15 years of service. She had been assigned to Echo Range 3 months earlier, transferred from a comfortable post at Nellis to oversee equipment testing operations in the restricted zone. She was efficient, disciplined, and notably reluctant to engage in casual conversation. Cole had learned early on that Reeves preferred written reports to verbal updates. She communicated through memos and incident logs, maintaining a professional distance from everyone under her command. At 30 hours, Cole began his rounds. The facility consisted of 4 main buildings connected by covered walkways: the operations center, equipment storage, the maintenance workshop, and the power distribution station. His job was to monitor systems, respond to alarms, and ensure that all testing equipment remained operational for the day crew. The operations center was quiet. Banks of computers displayed readouts from various sensors scattered across the test range. Seismographs tracked underground vibrations. Weather stations recorded wind speed and barometric pressure. Radar systems swept the restricted airspace, logging every return, every movement. Cole checked each station, noting the readings in his logbook. Everything appeared normal. He moved to the power distribution station at 01:15 hours. This building housed the primary electrical systems that fed the entire facility. 3 massive diesel generators stood ready to activate if the main grid failed. Transformers hummed steadily, converting and distributing power to dozens of subsystems. Cole walked the perimeter, checking gauges and temperature sensors. The air smelled of oil and ozone, familiar and reassuring. Major Reeves was in her office when Cole passed by, the light spilling from her doorway into the corridor. She was reviewing paperwork, her desk lamp casting sharp shadows across her face. She glanced up as Cole walked past, offered a brief nod, and returned to her work. No words exchanged. That was typical. The maintenance workshop occupied the westernmost building. It was Cole's domain, filled with spare parts, diagnostic equipment, and repair tools. He spent most of his shifts here, responding to minor malfunctions and preparing equipment for scheduled maintenance. Tonight, he had several circuit boards to test and a radio transceiver that needed recalibration. He settled into the work, the familiar routine calming his mind. Outside, the desert was silent. No wind, no distant traffic, just the vast empty darkness that surrounded Echo Range like an ocean. At 03:15 hours, Cole was soldering a connection on a circuit board when the lights flickered. It was brief, barely noticeable, but enough to make him pause. He looked up at the fluorescent tubes overhead. They glowed steadily, showing no sign of distress. He returned to his work, attributing the flicker to a momentary voltage fluctuation. 2 minutes later, at precisely 03:17 hours, every light in the facility went out. The darkness was absolute and immediate. Cole's soldering iron, still hot, cast a faint orange glow that did nothing to penetrate the blackness. He set it down carefully and stood, his eyes struggling to adjust. Outside, through the small window, he could see stars. Nothing else. No security lights. No building illumination. The entire facility had gone dark. He waited for the generators to kick in. Standard protocol dictated that backup power would activate within 15 seconds of a grid failure. Cole counted silently. 15 seconds passed, then 30, then a minute. The generators remained silent. Cole felt the first flutter of unease. A complete power failure was rare but not impossible. Equipment malfunctioned, breakers tripped, but the generators failing to activate was a different matter entirely. Those systems were redundant, designed to be fail-safe. For all 3 to remain offline suggested something more than a simple electrical fault. He reached for his radio, clipped to his belt. "Control, this is Cole. Confirming facility-wide power loss. Generators are not responding, requesting status update." Static answered him. Not the clean hiss of an open channel, but a crackling, distorted interference that made his teeth ache. He adjusted the frequency and tried again. The static persisted. Cole grabbed a flashlight from his tool drawer and stepped into the corridor. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing empty walls and closed doors. He made his way toward the operations center, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The background hum of the facility, the constant white noise of ventilation and electronics, was gone. The quiet felt oppressive, unnatural. He found Major Reeves in the corridor outside her office, holding her own flashlight. Her expression was controlled, but Cole could see tension in the way she held her shoulders. "Technician Cole," she said, her voice sharp. "What's the status of the generators?" "Unknown, ma'am. They didn't activate. I'm heading to the power station now to assess. I'll accompany you." They walked together through the covered walkway connecting the operations center to the power station. Their flashlights swept back and forth, illuminating concrete walls and steel support beams. The desert beyond the windows was invisible, a void of darkness. When they reached the power station, Cole pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The air was cooler here, the ventilation system silent. He swept his flashlight across the room, checking each generator in turn. They stood motionless, their massive turbines still. He moved to the control panel and examined the readouts. "Main breaker is closed," he said, tracing the connections with his flashlight. "Fuel lines are pressurized, battery systems are charged. There's no reason these shouldn't have started." "Then why didn't they?" Reeves's voice carried an edge of frustration. Cole shook his head. "I don't know, ma'am. This doesn't make sense. It's like something prevented them from activating." He moved to the first generator and began a manual diagnostic, checking connections, testing circuits. Everything appeared functional. He moved to the second generator, then the third. Each one showed the same results, fully operational systems that refused to start. "This isn't a mechanical failure," Cole said finally. "Something's interfering with the ignition sequence." Reeves was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Can you override it manually?" "I can try." Cole opened the service panel on the first generator and located the manual start mechanism. It was a backup system, designed to bypass the electronic controls and initiate combustion directly. He engaged the mechanism and stepped back. The generator coughed once, a brief rumble that sent vibrations through the floor. Then it fell silent again. Cole tried the second generator. Same result. A momentary ignition, then nothing. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "These are independent systems. They can't all fail simultaneously." Reeves's flashlight beam swept across the room, pausing on the main electrical panel. "What about the primary grid? Did we lose external power?" Cole moved to the panel and checked the incoming lines. "Negative. We're still receiving power from the main grid. The problem is internal distribution. Something's blocking the flow." He traced the circuits, following the wiring from the main panel to the distribution boards. And then, in the corner of the room, his flashlight illuminated something that made him stop. The floor was glowing. It was faint, barely visible, a pale blue luminescence that seemed to emanate from the concrete itself. The glow pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Cole stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Major Reeves. She turned and followed his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Is that radiation?" Reeves asked, her voice tight. "No," Cole said. "Radiation doesn't glow like that, and we'd be reading elevated levels on our dosimeters." He glanced at the badge clipped to his shirt. It showed no signs of exposure. The glow intensified slightly, spreading across a larger area of the floor. It didn't cast shadows. It didn't illuminate the surrounding space. It simply existed, a sourceless light that defied explanation. Cole felt a deep, instinctive wrongness settle in his gut. He had worked with electrical systems his entire adult life. He understood current, voltage, electromagnetic fields. This was none of those things. This was something else entirely. "We need to leave," he said quietly. Reeves didn't argue. They backed toward the door, their flashlights still trained on the glowing floor. The light pulsed again, brighter this time, and Cole felt a pressure in his ears, as if the air itself were being compressed. They stepped out into the corridor, and Cole pulled the door shut behind them. Through the small window in the door, they could see the glow continuing to spread, now covering nearly half the floor of the power station. "What the hell is that?" Reeves's voice had lost its professional composure. "I don't know, ma'am." They stood in the darkness, watching the impossible light pulse and shift inside the sealed room. Cole's radio crackled again, that same distorted static. He turned it off, the noise scraping against his nerves. "We need to document this," Reeves said, recovering some of her command presence. "Return to the maintenance workshop. See if you can restore power from there. I'm going to attempt contact with Nellis Command." "Ma'am, the radios aren't working." "Then I'll use the landline in my office." They separated, each returning to their respective stations. Cole walked back through the covered walkway, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The silence pressed against him, heavy and expectant. He felt watched, though he knew logically that he was alone. When he reached the maintenance workshop, he immediately checked the emergency lighting system. It was a separate circuit designed to activate independently of the main power grid. He found the control box and threw the manual switch. Nothing happened. Cole felt his unease deepen into something closer to fear. He had never encountered a situation where every backup system failed simultaneously. It violated basic engineering principles. It violated logic. He moved to the window and looked out at the desert. The stars provided just enough light to see vague shapes, the outline of buildings, the fence line in the distance. And then he saw something that made his breath catch. There was light in the sky. Not starlight. Not an aircraft. This was a concentrated glow, hovering perhaps 1,000 feet above the facility. It was the same pale blue color as the luminescence on the power station floor. As Cole watched, the light moved, descending slowly toward the ground. He grabbed his flashlight and ran to the door, pushing it open and stepping outside. The desert air hit him, cold and dry. He aimed his flashlight at the descending glow, but the beam was swallowed by the darkness, reaching nowhere near the object. The light continued its descent, silent and deliberate. Cole estimated it was now at 500 feet, directly above the operations center. The glow illuminated the ground below it, casting everything in that same sourceless blue light. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. The darkness returned, absolute and complete. Cole stood frozen, his flashlight held uselessly in his hand. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline flooding his system. He waited, listening, watching for any sign of the light's return. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. The desert remained dark and silent. And then, somewhere in the distance, he heard the generators start. The sound was immediate and loud. 3 diesel engines roaring to life simultaneously. A moment later, the facility lights flickered and came back on, flooding the compound with harsh illumination. Cole blinked against the sudden brightness, his eyes watering. He looked up at the sky. Nothing, just stars and empty darkness. Cole turned and ran back toward the power station. He found Major Reeves already there, standing in the doorway, staring at the floor. The blue glow was gone. The concrete looked normal, showing no signs of the impossible luminescence they had witnessed. "Did you see it?" Cole asked, breathless. Reeves turned to him. Her face was pale, her expression carefully neutral. "See what, technician?" "The light in the sky. It was right above the operations center." "I saw nothing," Reeves said flatly. "I was in my office, attempting to establish communications. The power returned at 03:29 hours. All systems appear to be functioning normally." Cole stared at her. "Ma'am, we both saw the floor glowing. And there was something outside in the sky. Technician Cole." Reeves's voice cut through his words like a blade. "I need you to prepare a written report on the power failure. Focus on the technical aspects. Generator failure to activate, probable causes, recommended maintenance actions. Have it on my desk by 06 hours." "But ma'am, that's an order." Cole's jaw clenched. He recognized what was happening. The same thing that happened whenever something unexplainable occurred in this place. Document the mundane, ignore the impossible. File it away and move on. "Yes, ma'am." Reeves held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "Return to your duties. I'll be conducting my own assessment of the incident." She walked away, her footsteps echoing in the now humming corridor. Cole stood alone in the power station, staring at the floor where the glow had been. He knelt and ran his hand across the concrete. It was cool to the touch, showing no signs of heat or residual energy. But he had seen it. He knew he had seen it. Cole returned to the maintenance workshop and sat at his desk. He pulled out an incident report form and stared at the blank page. How was he supposed to document what he had witnessed? How could he reduce that experience to technical language and procedural observations? He began writing. At 03:17 hours, a complete facility power failure occurred. Primary grid power remained active, but internal distribution systems failed to respond. Backup generators failed to activate through automated systems. Manual start procedures produced momentary ignition, but failed to sustain operation. He continued, filling the page with technical details, diagnostic observations, recommended actions. He mentioned nothing about the glowing floor, nothing about the light in the sky, nothing about the wrongness that had permeated every moment of those 12 minutes when the power was out. At 06:07 hours, Cole delivered his report to Major Reeves' office. She read it in silence, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she placed it in a folder and filed it in her desk drawer. "Thank you, technician. Your shift ends at 08:00 hours. Take the rest of the day off. Report back tomorrow at your regular time." "Yes, ma'am." Cole left the office and walked back to the maintenance workshop. He had 2 hours left in his shift. He tried to focus on routine tasks, but his mind kept returning to those 12 minutes. The darkness, the silence, the impossible light. At 07:45 hours, the day shift began arriving. Cole briefed his replacement, a younger technician named Harris, on the night's events. He kept his description vague, mentioning only the power failure and subsequent restoration. "Weird," Harris said. "Generators usually kick right in." "Yeah," Cole replied. "Weird." He clocked out and walked to his truck in the parking lot. The sun was rising, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Everything looked normal, mundane, ordinary, as if the night had never happened. Cole drove back to his apartment in Mercury, a small town that serviced the test range facilities. He should have been exhausted, but his mind was too active for sleep. He sat in his kitchen, drinking coffee, replaying every detail of the incident. The more he thought about it, the more questions emerged. The simultaneous failure of multiple independent systems, the blue glow that had no identifiable source, the object in the sky that had descended and then vanished, and Major Reeves's insistence on treating the entire event as a routine power outage. He knew better than to push. He had worked in classified facilities long enough to understand the unwritten rules. Some things were not discussed, some questions were not asked, and some experiences were filed away in memory, never to be officially acknowledged. But that didn't mean they weren't real. Cole returned to Echo Range the following night, clocking in at midnight as usual. The facility hummed with its normal sounds, all systems operational. He reviewed the maintenance logs from the day shift, looking for any reference to the previous night's power failure. The only entry was brief. Power disruption is 03:17:03:29 hours. Cause, electrical fault. Generators tested and confirmed operational. No further action required. No mention of the simultaneous system failures. No mention of the generators refusing to start. No mention of anything unusual. Major Reeves was on duty again. Cole saw her briefly during his rounds, exchanging only minimal communication. Her demeanor was professional, showing no sign that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. Cole wondered if he had imagined the fear he had seen in her eyes when they stood in the power station, watching the floor glow with impossible light. The night passed without incident. Power remained stable. All systems functioned normally. At 08 hours, Cole clocked out and drove home, feeling unsettled by the normalcy of it all. Over the following week, he tried to push the incident from his mind. He focused on his work, completed his routine maintenance tasks, and avoided thinking about what he had witnessed, but the memory refused to fade. It lingered at the edges of his consciousness, a persistent reminder that something fundamentally wrong had occurred. On the 8th night after the incident, Cole was working in the maintenance workshop when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. He looked up to see Major Reeves standing in the doorway. She was off duty, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, and a simple jacket. Her presence at the facility outside her shift was unusual. "Technician Cole," she said quietly. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course, ma'am." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. For a long moment she said nothing, her eyes scanning the workshop as if checking for listening devices. Finally, she spoke. "What I'm about to tell you goes no further than this room. Do you understand?" Cole felt his pulse quicken. "Yes, ma'am." Reeves sat on the edge of a workbench, her posture tense. "I've been stationed at Echo Range for 3 months. In that time, I've witnessed 4 incidents similar to what we experienced last week. Power failures, equipment malfunctions, and other things." "Other things?" She met his eyes. "Lights in the sky, objects moving in ways that defy physics, radar returns that appear and disappear without explanation. And every time, the official report reduces it to equipment failure or atmospheric phenomena." Cole absorbed this information in silence. He had suspected the truth, but hearing it confirmed still sent a chill through him. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I need you to understand something," Reeves said. "This facility isn't just a testing range. It's a monitoring station. We track activity in the restricted zones to the north and west. Activity that the Air Force does not want publicly acknowledged." "What kind of activity?" Reeves shook her head. "I don't know the details. My clearance isn't high enough, but I've seen enough to know that what we encountered last week wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last." Cole thought about this. "Are we in danger?" "I don't think so. Whatever these phenomena are, they've never demonstrated hostility. They observe. They interfere with our systems temporarily, and then they leave. And we're just supposed to ignore it. We're supposed to document it through official channels and follow orders," Reeves said. "But personally, I don't think ignoring it is wise. I think we need to pay attention." She stood and moved toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back to him. "Keep your incident reports factual and technical. Don't speculate, don't embellish, but keep your own records. Write down what you see when you see it, because someday, someone is going to start asking the right questions. And when they do, we need to have answers." She left, and Cole sat alone in the workshop, processing what she had told him. He understood now that the incident on September 12th was part of a larger pattern, a pattern that had been ongoing for months, perhaps years, and everyone involved had been instructed to minimize, rationalize, and forget. But forgetting wasn't something Cole was prepared to do. He started keeping a personal journal, separate from his official logs. Each night, he recorded detailed observations, weather conditions, equipment status, any unusual occurrences. Most nights were routine, filled with mundane technical notes, but occasionally something strange would happen. On October 3rd, all radio communications experienced interference for approximately 7 minutes. The static contained what sounded like a rhythmic pattern. almost like a pulse. It stopped as suddenly as it had started. On October 19th, the seismographs registered vibrations consistent with underground movement, but geological surveys showed no seismic activity in the region. On November 2nd, a security guard reported seeing lights moving across the desert floor in a coordinated pattern, as if searching for something. When a patrol was sent to investigate, nothing was found. Each incident was documented in official reports as equipment malfunction, atmospheric interference, or personnel error. Each time, the underlying strangeness was filed away and forgotten. Cole noticed that Major Reeves was becoming more withdrawn. She spent longer hours in her office, reviewing reports and making phone calls to Nellis Command. She looked tired, the weight of knowledge pressing down on her shoulders. In late November, a new directive came down from higher command. All personnel at Echo Range were required to sign updated non-disclosure agreements, emphasizing the classified nature of their work and the severe penalties for unauthorized disclosure of information. Cole signed the document without hesitation, understanding it for what it was: another layer of silence, another wall built around the truth. December arrived, bringing colder nights and occasional frost. Cole's shifts continued, the rhythm of work becoming almost meditative. But beneath the routine, he remained vigilant, watching for signs of the unusual, ready to document anything that fell outside the boundaries of normal. On December 18th, at 02:43 hours, it happened again. Cole was in the equipment storage building conducting inventory checks when the lights flickered. This time, he was ready. He immediately checked his watch, noting the exact time. The flicker lasted 3 seconds, then the lights stabilized. He grabbed his radio. "Control, this is Cole, confirming brief power fluctuation at 02:43 hours. Major Reeves's voice came back, calm and professional. "Confirmed, Cole. Stand by." Cole waited, his heart rate elevated. He counted the seconds, watching his equipment for any further signs of disturbance. At 02:44 hours, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. His breath became visible in the air. He keyed his radio again. "Control, temperature drop in storage building, significant and rapid. Stand by." The lights flickered again. This time they dimmed, but didn't go out completely. The fluorescent tubes glowed with about half their normal intensity, casting the room in shadows. Cole moved to the door and looked out across the facility. The other buildings showed the same dimmed lighting, and in the distance beyond the fence line, he saw them. Lights. Multiple lights. Not stars, not aircraft. These were low, perhaps 50 feet above the desert floor, moving in a synchronized pattern. They were the same pale blue color he had seen before, pulsing slowly. He counted 7 distinct lights arranged in a loose formation. They moved together, maintaining their relative positions, gliding over the desert toward the facility. Cole's radio crackled. "All personnel, this is Control, remain at your stations. Do not, repeat, do not go outside. This is a direct order." The lights continued their approach. Cole watched through the window, transfixed. They moved with purpose, as if searching, scanning the facility. When they reached the fence line, they stopped, hovering in place. The temperature continued to drop. Cole could see frost forming on the inside of the window. His fingers were going numb despite his work gloves. And then, one of the lights detached from the formation and moved toward the power station. It descended slowly, stopping about 10 feet above the building. The blue glow intensified, washing the area in cold light. Cole felt the same pressure in his ears he had experienced during the first incident. The air seemed to compress, as if something were pushing against the fabric of reality itself. The light remained stationary for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. Then it rose, rejoining the formation. The 7 lights hung there for a few seconds more. then accelerated upward at impossible speed, vanishing into the night sky. The temperature immediately began to return to normal. The lights in the facility brightened to full intensity. Cole's radio crackled with clear communication. "All personnel, report status." Cole keyed his radio. "Storage building, status green, no damage or casualties." Other voices checked in, each reporting the same. No injuries, no damage. Just another unexplainable event that would be filed away and forgotten. Cole looked at his watch. The entire event had lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Major Reeves's voice came over the facility-wide intercom. "All personnel maintain current positions until further notice. Do not discuss this incident over open channels. Written reports will be filed at end of shift." Cole sat down on a storage crate, his hands shaking. He had just witnessed something that defied every law of physics and engineering he understood. Multiple objects demonstrating intelligent behavior, moving with coordination and purpose. Not natural phenomena, not conventional aircraft, something else entirely. He pulled out his personal journal and began writing, documenting every detail while the memory was fresh. The exact time, the number of lights, their behavior, the temperature drop, the way they had hovered above the power station as if examining it. At 04 hours, Major Reeves appeared at the storage building. She looked pale but composed. "Technician Cole, I need your preliminary observations." Cole handed her his official incident report, keeping his personal journal concealed. She read it quickly, her expression neutral. "This matches other reports. Atmospheric electrical phenomena cause temporary power fluctuations and visual anomalies. That's the official explanation." "Ma'am, what we saw wasn't atmospheric. That's the official explanation," Reeves repeated, her voice carrying a warning. "Do you understand?" Cole met her eyes and saw something there he hadn't noticed before. Not just fear or frustration, but resignation. She had been fighting this battle longer than he had, and she had lost. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." She handed back his report. "Get some rest after your shift. Tomorrow will be routine." But they both knew there was no such thing as routine at Echo Range. The following week, Major Reeves was transferred. No explanation was given. No farewell. Cole arrived for his shift one night and learned she had been reassigned to a logistics post in Germany, effective immediately. Her replacement was Captain Morris, a by-the-book officer with no interest in discussing anything beyond standard procedures. Cole never saw Reeves again. He wondered if she had asked too many questions, pushed too hard for answers. Or maybe she had simply seen too much and needed to be moved somewhere far from the truth. The incidents continued. Never predictable, never following a pattern Cole could discern. Sometimes weeks would pass with nothing unusual. Then, without warning, something would happen. Lights in the sky, power fluctuations, equipment behaving in ways that defied technical specifications. Each time, Cole documented it in his personal journal. Each time, the official report reduced it to mundane explanations. And each time, the silence grew heavier, the weight of unacknowledged truth pressing down on everyone who worked at Echo Range. 3 months after Major Reeves's transfer, Cole was approached by a man in civilian clothes. It was during his day off, at a small diner in Mercury, where he often had breakfast. The man sat down across from him without invitation. "Brian Cole?" Cole looked up from his coffee. "Who's asking?" The man showed him credentials identifying him as Agent Thomas Keller, Office of Special Investigations. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about your work at Echo Range." Cole felt his stomach tighten. "I've signed non-disclosure agreements. I can't discuss classified work. I'm not asking about classified operations, Keller said. I'm asking about incidents that have been classified but perhaps shouldn't be. I don't know what you mean. Keller pulled out a file folder and opened it on the table. Inside were copies of incident reports, all from Echo Range, dating back several years. Each one documented power failures, equipment malfunctions, and unexplained phenomena. Each one had been officially attributed to technical faults or environmental conditions. You've been keeping your own records, Keller said. It wasn't a question. Cole said nothing. I'm not here to threaten you, Keller continued. I'm here because there's a small group within the military and intelligence community that believes these incidents deserve proper investigation, not cover-up investigation. Why are you telling me this? Because we need witnesses. People who have seen these things firsthand and are willing to provide detailed testimony. Confidentially, of course. Your career wouldn't be at risk. Cole studied the man across from him. What's the point? Every time something unusual happens, it gets buried. The reports get sanitized. The witnesses get reassigned or warned to stay quiet. That's true, Keller acknowledged. But documentation still matters. If enough evidence accumulates, if enough credible witnesses come forward, eventually the truth becomes impossible to suppress. Cole thought about Major Reeves, wherever she was now. He thought about the other personnel at Echo Range who had witnessed the unexplainable and been forced into silence. He thought about the lights in the sky, the glowing floor, the impossible movements that defied physics. I'll think about it, Cole said, finally. Keller nodded and stood. He placed a business card on the table. Take your time, but if you decide to talk, call that number. Use a payphone, not your home or work line. He left, and Cole sat alone with the business card and his thoughts. That night, Cole returned to Echo Range for his regular shift. As he walked through the facility, checking systems and logging readings, he felt the weight of decision pressing on him. He could maintain his silence, keep his head down, and continue collecting his paycheck. Or he could risk his career, possibly his freedom, by providing testimony to investigators who might or might not be legitimate. At 0317 hours, exactly 4 months after the first incident, Cole was in the maintenance workshop when he heard a sound that made him stop. It was faint, barely audible over the ambient noise of the facility. A humming, low and rhythmic, coming from somewhere outside. He set down his tools and walked to the window. The desert beyond was dark, illuminated only by the facility's perimeter lights. He saw nothing unusual, but the humming persisted, growing slightly louder. Cole grabbed his flashlight and went outside. The cold night air hit him immediately. He walked away from the building, moving towards the source of the sound. The humming grew more distinct, resonating in his chest like a bass note from a massive speaker. And then he saw it. Beyond the fence line, perhaps 100 yards away, something was hovering above the desert floor. It was larger than the lights he had seen before, perhaps 30 feet across, disc-shaped with a faint glow around its edges. The humming was coming from it, a deep vibration that felt both mechanical and organic. Cole stood frozen, his flashlight beam reaching toward the object but falling short. The craft, if that's what it was, remained motionless. He had the distinct impression that it was aware of him, that whatever intelligence controlled it knew he was standing there watching. For several minutes, neither the object nor Cole moved. They simply observed each other across the dark desert, separated by a fence and by a vast gulf of understanding. Then, without warning, the object rose vertically at incredible speed, accelerating upward until it was just a point of light among the stars. And then it was gone. Cole stood in the cold darkness, his heart pounding. He had just witnessed something that should not exist, could not exist according to everything he knew about physics and engineering. And yet he had seen it. It had been real. It had been there. He turned and walked back toward the facility. He didn't file an official report about what he had witnessed. He knew by now that such reports were meaningless. Instead, he documented it in his personal journal, adding it to the growing collection of observations that told a story the official record refused to acknowledge. The next day, Cole called the number on Agent Keller's business card from a payphone in Mercury. When Keller answered, Cole said simply, "I'm willing to talk." Over the following weeks, Cole provided detailed testimony about his experiences at Echo Range. He described the power failures, the glowing floor, the lights in the sky, the craft he had seen hovering beyond the fence. Keller recorded everything, asking clarifying questions but never expressing skepticism or disbelief. "You're not the only one," Keller told him during one session. "We've interviewed dozens of military personnel, contractors, and civilian employees who have worked at facilities in the Nevada test range. The pattern is consistent. Unidentified objects demonstrating advanced capabilities, official reports that minimize or ignore the incidents, and witnesses who are pressured into silence." "What's the end game?" Cole asked. "What are you trying to accomplish?" "Documentation," Keller said. "Right now, all we can do is gather evidence, compile testimony, and build a case that something significant is happening in these restricted zones. Eventually, that evidence will reach a critical mass, and when it does, the truth will have to be acknowledged." "You really believe that?" Keller met his eyes. "I have to. Because the alternative, living in a world where this level of secrecy and denial is accepted as normal, is unacceptable." Cole continued his work at Echo Range, maintaining his routine while secretly documenting every unusual occurrence. The incidents became less frequent over time, or perhaps he simply became better at recognizing the subtle signs that preceded them. Temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic interference, a particular quality of silence that seemed to descend over the facility. In May of 1992, Cole's contract at Echo Range ended. He was offered renewal, but he declined. He had spent 18 months at the facility, and it had taken a toll on him. The constant vigilance, the weight of secrets, the psychological strain of witnessing the impossible and being forced to pretend it was mundane. He took a position at a civilian radar installation in California, far from the restricted zones and classified projects. The work was routine, predictable, and refreshingly free from unexplainable phenomena. But the memories remained. On clear nights when Cole looked up at the stars, he would sometimes see a point of light moving in ways that suggested intelligence and purpose. And he would think about Echo Range, about Major Reeves, about the other witnesses who had been scattered to distant posts, each carrying their own burden of unacknowledged truth. Years later, in 2007, Cole received a phone call from Agent Keller. "I wanted you to know that the investigation has been concluded. The findings have been submitted to the appropriate authorities." "And?" Cole asked. "And officially, nothing has changed. The incidents at Echo Range and similar facilities have been attributed to a combination of equipment malfunctions, atmospheric phenomena, and misidentification of conventional aircraft." Cole felt a familiar disappointment settle over him. So it was all for nothing. "Not nothing," Keller said. "The documentation exists. The testimony has been recorded and preserved. And there are people within the military and intelligence community who now understand that something significant is happening in those restricted zones. The official narrative may not have changed, but the internal awareness has shifted. That matters. Does it? I believe it does. Change happens slowly, especially when confronting truths that challenge fundamental assumptions. But it does happen. The witnesses who came forward, including you, have contributed to that eventual change. After the call ended, Cole sat in his backyard, watching the evening sky darken. He thought about the night of September 12, 1991, when the power had failed at Echo Range and the floor had glowed with impossible light. He thought about the craft he had seen hovering beyond the fence, humming with a frequency that resonated in his bones. The official record stated that nothing unusual had occurred. Equipment had malfunctioned. Personnel had misidentified conventional phenomena. Standard technical explanations for routine incidents. But Cole knew better. He had been there. He had seen the truth. And somewhere in a locked file, his testimony remained, waiting for the day when the world would be ready to acknowledge what he and countless others had witnessed. Echo Range continued its operations, serving as a testing facility for classified military projects. New personnel cycled through, most of them unaware of the incidents that had occurred there. The power station stood silent, its floors showing no trace of the glow that had once emanated from the concrete. The desert remained vast and empty, keeping its secrets beneath the endless Nevada sky. But on certain nights when atmospheric conditions were right and the restricted zones were quiet, lights could still be seen moving across the test range. Lights that defied easy explanation. Lights that suggested intelligence, purpose, and capabilities far beyond human technology. Security personnel documented these sightings in their logs. Radar operators tracked them on their scopes, and each time, the official reports reduced them to mundane explanations. Weather balloons, atmospheric anomalies, civilian aircraft straying into restricted airspace. The cycle of observation and denial continued, unbroken and seemingly endless. Brian Cole retired from his civilian position in 2015, having spent 24 years maintaining radar systems across various installations. He settled in a small town in Oregon, far from military facilities and classified projects. He rarely spoke about his time at Echo Range, even with close friends and family. The non-disclosure agreements he had signed decades earlier still bound him, and old habits of silence die hard. But he kept his personal journal, the detailed record of those 18 months when he had witnessed the impossible and been told to forget. He stored it carefully, knowing that someday it might serve as evidence, as testimony, as proof that what he had experienced was real. In 2018, the Pentagon released 3 videos showing encounters between Navy pilots and unidentified aerial phenomena. The videos showed objects moving in ways that defied conventional explanation, performing maneuvers that no known aircraft could accomplish. The official acknowledgement of these incidents marked a shift, however small, in the government's willingness to discuss the unexplainable. Cole watched the news coverage with a mixture of vindication and frustration. Finally, after decades of denial, there was public acknowledgement that these phenomena existed. But the coverage was limited. The official statements carefully worded to avoid deeper implications. He thought about reaching out to the media, offering his testimony and documentation. But he knew that his experiences were decades old, from a facility that officially denied any unusual activity. His story would be dismissed as misremembered, exaggerated, or simply false. So he remained silent, one more witness to inexplicable events that the world was not yet ready to fully acknowledge. Major Samantha Reeves, wherever she was, likely felt the same, as did countless other military personnel who had served at Echo Range, Area 51, and the other restricted facilities scattered across the Nevada desert. Each one carried their own memories, their own experiences with phenomena that defied explanation. And the lights continued to appear, moving through the night skies above the test ranges, observed and documented but never officially explained. They represented a truth that existed in the space between what was acknowledged and what was real. a truth that countless witnesses understood but were powerless to prove. Cole often thought about that night when the power had failed, when the floor had glowed with sourceless light, when reality itself had seemed to bend around something that should not exist. He thought about Major Reeves's face in the darkness, illuminated by her flashlight, showing a fear that their military training had not prepared them for. He thought about the craft hovering beyond the fence line at exactly 03:17 a.m., humming with a frequency that felt both familiar and utterly alien. The way it had observed him, assessed him, and then departed without explanation. These memories remained vivid, undimmed by time or distance. They were as real to him as any other experience in his life, perhaps more real because of their profound strangeness. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was not alone, that across the country, across the world, there were others who had witnessed similar phenomena, others who carried the burden of knowledge that could not be officially acknowledged. The truth existed in their collective testimony, in their personal records, in their quiet certainty that what they had experienced was real. Someday, Cole believed, that truth would emerge fully. The documentation would reach critical mass. The witnesses would find their voices, and the world would have to confront the reality that the skies above us, the spaces we think we understand and control, contain mysteries far deeper than we have been willing to acknowledge. Until that day, the silence continued. The official reports minimized and explained away. The witnesses remained scattered and isolated, and the lights kept appearing in the Nevada night, moving with purpose and intelligence, observed but unexplained, real but unacknowledged. Echo Range 03:17 a.m. A moment in time when the boundary between the known and unknown dissolved, when two military personnel witnessed something that defied their understanding of reality. A moment that was documented, filed away, and officially forgotten. But not by those who were there, never by those who were there. The Nevada Test Range sprawls across thousands of square miles of high desert, a vast expanse of restricted airspace where the Air Force conducts classified testing operations. Within this already secret territory lie zones of even greater restriction, areas marked on maps with alphanumeric designations and warnings that unauthorized entry will result in immediate detention or use of deadly force. Restricted Zone. Charlie occupied the northwestern quadrant of the range, a desolate stretch of alkali flats and rocky outcrops where even military personnel required special clearance to enter. The zone's official purpose was listed as sensor calibration and electromagnetic testing, deliberately vague language that discouraged questions. On the night of April 6, 1993, Airman First Class Lucas Ford was assigned to patrol the perimeter of Zone Charlie as part of a routine security sweep. At 26, Ford had been stationed at Nellis Air Force Base for 18 months, spending most of that time conducting ground patrols in the restricted zones. The work was monotonous, consisting of long drives through empty desert, checking fence lines and sensor arrays, watching for any signs of unauthorized intrusion. Ford's patrol partner that night was Paul Vega, a civilian engineer contracted by the Air Force to maintain the remote monitoring stations scattered throughout the test range. Vega was 42, a career defense contractor who had worked on classified projects for over 15 years. He was quiet, methodical, and notably uninterested in small talk. Ford had partnered with him on 3 previous patrols, and their longest conversation had lasted maybe 5 minutes. They met at the motor pool at 22 hours, conducting a standard equipment check on their patrol vehicle, a modified Humvee equipped with communications gear, thermal imaging systems, and emergency supplies. The vehicle's odometer showed 187,443 miles, testament to the endless circuits it had made through the desert. Ford ran his hand along the hood, feeling the residual warmth from the day's heat still radiating from the metal despite the cooling night air. The motor pool was nearly empty at this hour. Just a few scattered vehicles parked in neat rows under the harsh sodium lights. A mechanic worked on a transport truck in the far bay, the clang of tools echoing across the concrete. The smell of diesel fuel and motor oil hung heavy in the air, familiar and oddly comforting to Ford. He had come to associate these smells with the beginning of his shifts, the transition from the structured world of the base to the vast emptiness of the desert. "Route Delta 7 tonight," Ford said, reviewing the patrol assignment on his clipboard. "We'll be checking sensor stations 12 through 19. Vega nodded, loading his equipment into the rear compartment with careful precision. He carried a ruggedized laptop, various testing devices, and a thermal camera he used to check for equipment overheating. Each piece was secured in foam-lined cases, protected against the rough terrain they would traverse. Should take about 6 hours if nothing's malfunctioning. Weather report shows clear skies, no wind, good conditions." Ford appreciated Vega's efficiency. The contractor didn't waste time with unnecessary conversation, didn't complain about the tedious nature of their work. He simply did his job with quiet competence. In the 18 months Ford had been at Nellis, he had partnered with dozens of different personnel on these patrols. Some talked too much, filling the silence with nervous chatter. Others asked questions about the restricted zones that Ford wasn't authorized to answer. Vega did neither. He understood the boundaries of their work and respected them. They completed their equipment check in silence. Radio systems, operational. GPS navigation, locked and tracking. Emergency medical kit, sealed and current. Water supply, 12 gallons. Fuel, full tank, plus 2 jerry cans. Spare tire, inflated and secured. Flashlights, charged. Emergency flares, present. Everything by the book, exactly as protocol demanded. Ford signed off on the vehicle inspection form and handed it to the motor pool sergeant. "Patrol 7 Delta, departing at 22:47 hours. Estimated return, 06 hours." The sergeant logged it in his duty book without looking up. "Stay safe out there, Ford." "Always do." But even as Ford said the words, he felt the familiar flutter of unease that preceded every patrol into the restricted zones. It wasn't fear, exactly, more a heightened awareness that he was leaving the relative safety of the base and entering territory where normal rules didn't always apply. He had heard stories from other security personnel, whispered accounts of strange lights and unexplained equipment failures. Most dismissed these stories as desert legends, exaggerations born of isolation and boredom, but Ford had learned to pay attention to patterns, and there were too many similar accounts to ignore entirely. They departed Nellis at 22:47 hours, driving north on a paved road that quickly deteriorated into graded dirt. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but desert scrub and the occasional jackrabbit darting across the road. Behind them, the lights of Las Vegas created a faint glow on the southern horizon, the only reminder of civilization. That glow would fade within the first hour, leaving them in a darkness so complete it felt primordial. Ford drove, his hands relaxed on the wheel, his eyes scanning the landscape with practiced ease. He had driven this route dozens of times, knew every turn, every washout, every section where the road became treacherous after rain. The Humvee's suspension absorbed the rough terrain with mechanical efficiency, the diesel engine maintaining a steady rumble that became white noise after the first few miles. The desert at night held a particular quality that Ford had come to appreciate. During the day, the landscape appeared harsh and forbidding, all glare and heat shimmer. But at night, it transformed into something almost beautiful. The air cooled quickly after sunset, dropping from the high 80s to the low 40s within hours. The stars emerged with startling clarity, unobscured by humidity or light pollution. On moonless nights like this one, the Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of diamonds, so dense it seemed impossible that such brilliance existed in the same universe as the darkness below. Vega sat in the passenger seat, checking his equipment readings and occasionally making notes in a logbook. His laptop screen cast a pale blue glow across his face, reflecting off his glasses. He worked with the focused intensity of someone who found comfort in data and precision. Ford had learned that Vega was a widower, his wife having died of cancer 3 years earlier. The defense contract work kept him busy, gave him purpose, allowed him to avoid the empty house that waited for him back in Las Vegas. They had never discussed this directly. Ford had learned it from casual comments over the course of their patrols together. Vega was a private man, and Ford respected that privacy. The radio played softly, tuned to the range control frequency. Occasional bursts of communication crackled through the speakers, brief exchanges between distant units conducting their own patrols or exercises. Bravo 3-1, checkpoint Delta. Control, roger that. Charlie 5-5, sensor station 40, all green. The voices were calm, routine, the sound of professionals executing well-rehearsed procedures. Ford found the rhythm of these communications soothing, evidence that others were out here in the darkness, maintaining the same vigilant watch. At 23:34 hours, they reached the first checkpoint, a gate in the chain-link fence that marked the boundary of Restricted Zone Charlie. The fence stretched in both directions as far as the headlights could reach, topped with coiled razor wire and marked every 100 yards with signs warning of restricted access. Motion sensors and cameras monitored the perimeter, feeding data back to range control. Ford had often wondered what those monitoring stations saw on their screens during the long desert nights. Coyotes triggering false alarms, the occasional drifter who wandered too close and had to be escorted away by security, and perhaps, though this was never officially acknowledged, other things that moved through the night with purposes unknown. Ford stopped the vehicle and radioed in their position. The microphone felt cool in his hand, the plastic worn smooth by countless previous transmissions. Range control, this is Patrol 7 Delta, checkpoint Alpha, requesting clearance to enter Zone Charlie. The response came back immediately. The duty controller's voice flat and professional. Patrol 7 Delta, range control. You are cleared to proceed. Report at each sensor station. Acknowledge. 7 Delta, acknowledged. Ford replaced the microphone and climbed out of the Humvee. The night air hit him immediately, sharp and clean, carrying the faint scent of sage. He walked to the gate, his boots crunching on the gravel. The padlock was military grade, requiring both a key and a combination. He had memorized the sequence months ago. Right to 34, left to 17, right to 28. The lock opened with a satisfying click. He swung the gate open, the hinges protesting with a metallic squeal that seemed too loud in the vast silence. He drove through, then got out to secure it behind them. Protocol required that all gates be locked immediately after passage, even if you were the only vehicle in the area. The reasoning was simple. If an unauthorized person somehow made it this far, they shouldn't find an open invitation deeper into the restricted zone. As Ford secured the padlock, he paused and looked back south, toward the distant glow of Las Vegas. From here, it was just a faint smudge of light on the horizon, barely visible. He thought about the people there, going about their evening routines, completely unaware of the vast, restricted zones that surrounded them, the classified operations conducted in their backyard. Beyond the fence, the landscape looked identical to what they had just left. the same expanse of desert hardpan and scattered vegetation, but the air felt different somehow, heavier, more oppressive. Ford had noticed this on previous patrols into Zone Charlie. There was a quality to the silence here that felt unnatural, as if the desert itself were holding its breath, waiting for something. Other security personnel had mentioned the same sensation, though always in lowered voices, as if speaking too loudly about it might draw unwanted attention. Vega had noticed it too. "It's quieter here," he had commented on their first patrol together. "The sound dampens. Even the Humvee engine sounds muffled." Ford had attributed it to psychological factors, the knowledge that they were entering a place where things happened that couldn't be easily explained. But as he climbed back into the vehicle and continued north, he couldn't shake the feeling that the difference was real, physical, measurable if one had the right instruments. They drove deeper into the restricted zone, following a barely visible track across the hardpan. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by any light pollution. Ford could make out the Milky Way, a river of light stretching across the sky. He had grown to appreciate these moments of beauty during his patrols, brief respites from the monotony. Sensor Station 12 appeared in their headlights at 0019 hours, a small concrete bunker housing electronic monitoring equipment. Vega climbed out, carrying his laptop and testing gear. Ford remained in the vehicle, maintaining radio watch while Vega conducted his diagnostic checks. The process took about 15 minutes. Vega ran through his checklist, verifying that the sensors were operational, the power system stable, and the data transmission clean. He uploaded the readings to his laptop, flagged 2 minor anomalies for later analysis, and returned to the vehicle. "Station 12 is green," he reported. "Minor fluctuation in the seismograph, but within normal parameters." They continued to stations 13 and 14, each stop following the same pattern. Park, check, log, move on. The routine was soothing in its predictability. Ford had learned to embrace the monotony, finding a kind of meditation in the endless repetition. At 0203 hours, they reached Station 15, located in a particularly isolated section of Zone Charlie. The landscape here was almost lunar in its desolation, flat expanses of white alkali punctuated by dark volcanic rock. No vegetation grew here. Nothing moved except the occasional dust devil stirred up by thermal currents. Vega performed his checks while Ford stepped out to stretch his legs. The night air was cold, hovering just above freezing. He could see his breath in the glow of the Humvee's interior lights. He walked a few paces from the vehicle, looking up at the stars, enjoying the silence. And then he noticed something odd. The radio had gone quiet. Not dead, not producing static, just silent. The constant low-level chatter that normally filled the range control frequency had stopped. Ford frowned and returned to the vehicle, checking the radio settings. Everything appeared normal. The frequency was correct. The power levels were good, but no sound came through the speakers. "Vega," Ford called out. "Radio's gone quiet." Vega looked up from his laptop. "Equipment failure?" "Don't think so. Everything looks operational." Vega climbed into the passenger seat and examined the radio himself. After a moment, he keyed the transmit button. "Range control, this is Patrol 7 Delta. Radio check, over." No response. Not even static. "That's unusual," Vega said quietly. Ford tried the backup radio, a handheld unit kept in the equipment locker. It produced the same result. Operational indicators showing normal but complete silence on all frequencies. "Could be atmospheric interference," Vega suggested. "Temperature inversion can create dead zones in radio transmission." "Maybe." Ford didn't sound convinced. He had experienced radio dead zones before, but they usually produced distortion or fading, not complete silence. They decided to continue the patrol and report the communication issue when they reached the next checkpoint. Vega returned to his diagnostic work at Station 15 while Ford remained in the vehicle, periodically trying the radio without success. At 02:27 hours, Vega finished his checks and returned to the Humvee. Station 15 is showing some interesting readings. Temperature fluctuations in the monitoring equipment, about 3 degrees below ambient. Not enough to indicate equipment failure, but unusual. You think it's related to the radio problem? Possibly. Electromagnetic interference could affect both systems. They drove toward Station 16, following the faint track through the darkness. Ford kept the headlights on high beam, scanning the desert ahead. The silence in the vehicle was absolute now, with even the radio's background hiss gone. It felt wrong, oppressive, as if they were moving through a bubble of isolation. At 02:41 hours, Vega suddenly said, "Stop the vehicle." Ford braked immediately. "What is it?" Vega was staring at his thermal camera, his face illuminated by its display screen. "I'm picking up something on thermal, multiple contacts, elevated position." "Aircraft?" "I don't think so. They're stationary. 3 distinct heat signatures, but..." He paused, adjusting the camera's settings. "This doesn't make sense. The signatures are showing cooler than ambient air temperature. That's not possible. Heat signatures are always warmer than background." "I know." Vega's voice carried a note of confusion. "But that's what I'm seeing. 3 objects, approximately 2,000 feet altitude, each registering about 15 degrees cooler than surrounding air." Ford felt his pulse quicken. "Where?" Vega pointed northwest, toward a section of empty sky. "That direction, about 3 miles out." Ford killed the headlights. The darkness rushed in, absolute and impenetrable. He waited for his eyes to adjust, counting slowly to 30. When he looked up again, he could see the stars with crystal clarity. And he could see 3 points of light. They were faint, barely visible, hanging motionless in the sky. They weren't stars, they were too low, too close. They weren't aircraft, they showed no navigation lights, no strobes. They were simply there, 3 pale spheres of luminescence suspended in the darkness. "You seeing this?" Ford's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." Vega had set down his thermal camera and was now watching the lights with naked eyes. "They're not showing up as hot, they're showing up as cold. That shouldn't be possible." They sat in silence, watching the lights. The spheres remained stationary, not drifting or moving. After several minutes, Ford said, "I'm going to try the radio again." He reached for the transmit button and keyed it. "Range control, this is Patrol 7 Delta. We have visual contact with unidentified lights in Zone Charlie. Request guidance." Silence answered him. Vega was still watching the thermal camera. "Temperature drop is increasing. The area around those objects is now showing 23 degrees below ambient. That's not natural. Nothing radiates cold like that." Ford felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He had been trained to handle various security scenarios, intrusions, equipment failures, even potential hostile encounters, but nothing in his training covered objects that radiated cold while floating silently in the desert sky. "Should we approach?" Vega asked. It was a good question. Standard protocol for unknown contacts was to observe and report, but with communications down, reporting wasn't an option. And something about those lights, the way they hung there with such stillness, made Ford deeply reluctant to get any closer. "We maintain position," he decided. "Continue observation. Log everything." Vega pulled out a notebook and began writing, recording the exact time, location, and descriptions of what they were witnessing. Ford grabbed a pair of binoculars from the equipment locker and studied the lights through magnification. Through the binoculars, the spheres became more defined. They were perfectly round, glowing with a pale white luminescence that seemed to pulse very slowly, like something breathing. He could see no structure, no surface details, just smooth, featureless spheres of light. They remained in a triangular formation, each point equidistant from the others. "How long have they been there?" Ford asked. Vega checked his notes. "We first noticed them at 0241. It's now 0247, 6 minutes and counting." 6 minutes of complete stillness. No aircraft could hover like that. No helicopter could maintain such perfect position in complete silence, and the temperature anomaly only deepened the mystery. At 2:52 hours, the lights moved. It happened without warning. All 3 spheres descended simultaneously, dropping about 500 feet in less than 2 seconds. The movement was too fast, too controlled. They stopped at their new altitude with no deceleration, no drift, simply halting in midair as if physics didn't apply to them. "Did you see that?" Ford's voice was tight. "Recorded it on thermal." Vega's hands were shaking slightly as he adjusted the camera. They moved in perfect synchronization, and the temperature drop followed them. The cold zone is now at the new altitude. The spheres remained at their new height for approximately 2 minutes, then descended again, this time moving closer to the ground. They were now perhaps 500 feet above the desert floor, much closer to Ford and Vega's position. Ford felt an overwhelming urge to drive away, to put distance between them and those impossible lights. But something kept him frozen in place, unable to look away. It was like being caught in the gaze of something vast and incomprehensible, something that existed outside the normal rules of reality. "They're aware of us," Vega said quietly. "I don't know how I know, but they know we're here." Ford felt the same certainty. The lights weren't random phenomena. They were demonstrating intelligence, purpose. The way they moved, the way they maintained their formation, suggested consciousness and intent. At 02:59 hours, all 3 spheres brightened simultaneously. The increase in luminosity was dramatic, transforming them from faint glows to brilliant points of white light. The desert floor around the Humvee became visible in their glow, shadows stretching across the hardpan. And then Ford noticed his watch. He had glanced at it just before the lights brightened, verifying the time for Vega's log. It had read 02:59 hours. But now, looking down at the same watch, the digital display showed 04:11. That was impossible. He had looked away for maybe 5 seconds, not 72 minutes. "Vega," he said, his voice hoarse. "What time do you have?" Vega checked his watch and went very still. 04:11. "That can't be right." "I know." Vega's face had gone pale. "I was just logging 2:59. That was seconds ago." They sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. The lights were still there, still glowing brightly, still hovering in their triangular formation. But somehow, impossibly, over an hour had passed in what felt like moments. Ford tried the radio again, hands fumbling with the controls. "Range control, this is Patrol 7 Delta. We have a time discrepancy. Request immediate guidance." This time, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the speakers, followed by a voice, distorted but recognizable. "Patrol 7 Delta, range control. Your transmission is garbled. Repeat your last." "Range control, we've experienced a time discrepancy. Our watches show 04:11, but we have no memory of the last hour and 12 minutes. There was a long pause. Then a different voice came through, harder and more authoritative. "Patrol 7 Delta, This is Range Command. Provide your exact coordinates and stand by for instructions." Ford read off their GPS position. The voice acknowledged and ordered them to remain in place. No explanation. No questions about the time discrepancy. Just orders to wait. The 3 spheres of light began to ascend. They rose slowly at first, then accelerated smoothly, climbing higher and higher into the night sky. Within 30 seconds, they were just points of light again, indistinguishable from stars. And then they were gone. Ford and Vega sat in the Humvee, neither speaking, both trying to comprehend what had just happened. The desert around them looked normal now, just empty hardpan and scrub under a star-filled sky. The temperature on Vega's thermal camera showed normal readings. It was as if the last hour and 12 minutes had been erased, leaving only a gap in their memories and the testimony of their watches. "Did we—" Ford started, then stopped. "Did we just lose time?" "I don't know what we just experienced," Vega replied. "But according to every instrument we have, 72 minutes passed. We were watching those lights. They brightened, and suddenly it's over an hour later." Ford checked the vehicle's systems. The onboard clock showed 0411. The GPS log showed them stationary at this location since 2:41 hours. But there was nothing in between. No record of observations. No logged activities. Just a gap. At 0423 hours, headlights appeared in the distance, approaching from the south. 2 vehicles, moving fast across the desert. They were military Humvees, similar to Ford's patrol vehicle but equipped with additional communications gear and what looked like scientific equipment. The vehicles stopped 20 yards away. 6 personnel emerged, all wearing uniforms that identified them as from Nellis, but with no unit insignia or name tags. The leader, a captain based on his rank insignia, approached Ford and Vega's vehicle. "Airman Ford, Mr. Vega, I'm Captain Martinez. I need you both to step out of the vehicle." They complied. Martinez's expression was neutral, giving nothing away. "I need you to provide a detailed account of everything you experienced tonight. Start from when you entered Zone Charlie." Ford and Vega exchanged glances. Then Ford began recounting the patrol, the radio silence, the lights, the temperature anomalies, and the impossible time jump. Martinez listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a tablet. When Ford finished, Martinez turned to Vega. "Mr. Vega, do you corroborate Airman Ford's account?" "Yes, sir. Everything he described matches my observations. I have thermal camera footage and written logs. I'll need those." Vega handed over his camera and notebook. Martinez passed them to one of his team members, who immediately began downloading the data. The other personnel were moving around Ford's vehicle, using various instruments to take readings. "Sir," Ford said carefully, "what just happened to us?" Martinez looked at him for a long moment before responding. "That's being determined. For now, I need you both to understand that everything you experienced tonight is classified. You will not discuss it with anyone. Not your fellow airmen, not your colleagues, not your families. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," they both replied. "You'll be transported back to Nellis for debriefing. Your patrol vehicle will be taken for analysis. The remainder of your shift is canceled." One of Martinez's team approached and spoke quietly in his ear. Martinez nodded and turned back to Ford and Vega. "The initial readings show elevated electromagnetic activity in this area. The sensor data from your thermal camera confirms unusual temperature gradients. These findings will be investigated further." "Sir," Vega said, "the time discrepancy will be addressed in your debriefing." Martinez cut him off. "For now, I need you both to get into that vehicle." He gestured toward one of the waiting Humvees. They were driven back to Nellis in silence, neither allowed to speak to each other. The sun was beginning to rise as they reached the base, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold. To Ford, the beauty felt incongruous, wrong. How could the world look so normal after what they had just experienced? They were separated at Nellis. Ford was taken to a windowless room in a building he didn't recognize, part of the base, but clearly used for special purposes. The building itself was unmarked, standing apart from the main complex, surrounded by a separate security fence. 2 armed guards stood at the entrance, checking credentials with unusual thoroughness before allowing anyone inside. The interior was sparse, institutional, designed for function rather than comfort. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a flat, colorless glow. A female officer, a major with the last name Patterson on her nameplate, conducted his debriefing. She was perhaps 40, with short dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. She wore no unit insignia, nothing that would identify what branch or program she represented. Her uniform was standard Air Force, but something about her bearing suggested she operated outside normal military channels. The room itself was deliberately austere. A metal table, 3 chairs, a digital recorder, and nothing else. No windows, no decorations, no distractions. The walls were painted a neutral beige that seemed designed to induce psychological discomfort through sheer blandness. Ford had been trained in security procedures, knew the basics of interrogation techniques. This room was built to encourage cooperation through isolation and sensory deprivation. Patterson began with routine questions, establishing timeline and location. Where had Ford been stationed before Nellis? How long had he worked Zone Charlie patrols? Had he experienced any previous unusual incidents? Her voice was steady, professional, revealing nothing of her own thoughts or reactions. She took notes on a tablet computer, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. The session lasted 4 hours. Patterson asked questions, many of them repetitive, clearly testing the consistency of Ford's account. She wanted exact times, precise descriptions, specific details about the lights and the time jump. Ford answered as accurately as he could, though the memories already felt strange, dreamlike, as if they belonged to someone else. The more he tried to recall the details, the more elusive they became, like trying to remember a dream after waking. When the lights brightened, Patterson asked for the 3rd time, "Describe exactly what you felt." Ford tried to access the memory. "It's unclear. I remember seeing them get brighter. The intensity increased dramatically, maybe 10 times as bright as before. And then I was looking at my watch and it showed 04:11. But I have no memory of the time in between. It's not blank exactly. It's more like those moments never existed for me, like they were edited out of my experience. Did you feel any physical sensations? Dizziness? Nausea? Disorientation? No, nothing like that. It was more like I blinked and time had jumped forward. There was no transition, no sense of time passing. One moment it was 02:59. The next moment it was 04:11. And those 72 minutes just weren't there." Patterson made notes on her tablet. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. Some witnesses in similar situations report experiencing unusual thoughts or impulses during these events. Did you have any such experiences? What do you mean by unusual? Thoughts that didn't feel like your own. Urges to perform actions you wouldn't normally consider. A sense of communication without words. Ford felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't mentioned it in his initial account, had almost convinced himself he had imagined it, but there had been something. In the moments before the time jump, while the lights were hovering close, he had felt a presence. Not threatening, but intensely curious, as if something were examining not just his body but his thoughts, his memories, the essential core of what made him human. I felt observed, he admitted, like something was studying me. Not hostile, just interested, clinical almost. Patterson's expression didn't change, but she typed rapidly on her tablet. Did this observation feel external or internal? What's the difference? External would be like someone watching you from a distance. Internal would be like something accessing your thoughts directly. Ford considered this carefully. Internal, it felt like whatever was out there could see inside my head, could read my thoughts if it wanted to. And did you sense any communication? Any attempt to convey information or intent? No, just observation, like I was a specimen being examined. Patterson asked more questions, probing deeper into his psychological state during and after the encounter. Had he experienced any dreams or nightmares since the incident? Any unusual physical symptoms? Changes in appetite, sleep patterns, mood? Ford answered honestly, yes to the dreams, vivid and disturbing, though he couldn't quite remember them upon waking. No to everything else. After 3 hours, Patterson left the room, telling Ford to wait. He sat alone in the silence, the fluorescent lights humming their monotonous note. He checked his watch repeatedly, as if expecting it to jump forward again, to steal more time from him without permission. But the seconds ticked by normally, predictably, following the laws of physics as they should. Patterson returned with the folder. She placed it on the table, but didn't open it. Airman Ford, I need you to understand the serious nature of this incident. What you experienced falls under the highest classification levels. The consequences of discussing this with unauthorized personnel are severe. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and potential federal prosecution. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. You're being given a 3-day leave effective immediately. When you return, you'll be reassigned to a different duty station. Your time at Nellis is concluded. Ford felt a jolt of surprise that cut through his exhaustion. Ma'am, I wasn't scheduled for reassignment. I have another 8 months on my current posting. You are now. Orders will be cut by end of day. You'll receive notification through normal channels. She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. This isn't punishment, Airman. It's standard procedure for personnel who experience certain types of incidents. Fresh start, new location, no reminders of what occurred. What about Vega? Is he being reassigned too? Mr. Vega's situation is being handled separately. You won't have contact with him again. The finality in her voice made it clear this wasn't open for discussion. Ford was being isolated from the only other person who could corroborate his experience, separated from his duty station, removed from any position where he might be able to investigate further. It was efficient, clinical, and deeply unsettling. Dismissed. He was escorted out of the building and told to return to his barracks, pack his belongings, and await further instructions. As he walked across the base in the morning sunlight, Ford felt disconnected from reality. The base was coming alive around him, personnel moving between buildings, vehicles driving past, aircraft engines roaring in the distance. Normal operations, normal day, as if the night had never happened. But for Ford, everything had changed. Less than 12 hours ago, he had been driving through the desert on a routine patrol. Now he was being removed from his assignment, warned into silence, and left to process an experience that defied explanation. The casual normalcy of the base felt like an insult, a denial of the profound strangeness he had witnessed. In his barracks, he found a note on his bunk. It was handwritten, unsigned, on plain paper that showed no official markings or letterhead. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost mechanical in its uniformity. Unit 7, Building 304, 1600 hours. Come alone. Ford stared at the note, turning it over in his hands. Building 304 was a storage facility on the north edge of the base, rarely used and generally unmanned. He had driven past it dozens of times, but had never had reason to enter. The note could be a trap, or it could be from someone who wanted to talk off the record. Either way, Ford knew he would go. After what he had experienced, after the debriefing and the forced reassignment, he needed answers. Or at least he needed to know that someone else acknowledged the truth of what had happened. He spent the day packing his belongings with mechanical efficiency. His entire life at Nellis fit into 3 duffel bags and a footlocker. Uniforms, personal items, a few books, some photographs. 8 months of memories reduced to a few cubic feet of possessions. He worked slowly, his mind elsewhere, replaying the events of the previous night over and over. The 3 lights, the impossible cold, the sense of being observed, and the time jump, that inexplicable gap, where 72 minutes had vanished from his life, leaving only the testimony of his watch and the certainty that something beyond understanding had occurred. He tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those 3 spheres of light hanging in the darkness, glowing with impossible luminescence. He checked his watch repeatedly, as if expecting it to jump forward again, to steal more time from him without permission. But the seconds ticked by normally, predictably, following the laws of physics as they should. The ordinariness of it felt wrong somehow, as if the universe should acknowledge what had happened, should show some sign that reality had been bent and twisted in the Nevada desert. At 15:45 hours, Ford left the barracks and walked toward Building 304. He took an indirect route, moving through less traveled areas of the base, though he wasn't sure why. Perhaps instinct told him that this meeting should remain unnoticed. Perhaps he was simply being paranoid, seeing conspiracy in every shadow after the morning's debriefing. The storage facility was isolated, surrounded by empty ground and chain-link fence. Heat shimmered off the pavement, creating mirages that made the building seem to waver and shift. The main door was unlocked, unusual for a military facility. He entered cautiously, finding himself in a dim corridor lined with storage units, each secured with padlocks. The air inside was stuffy, smelling of dust and old cardboard. "Unit 7 is at the end," a voice said from the shadows. Ford turned to see Paul Vega stepping into view. The civilian engineer looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. "You got a note too?" Ford asked. "Yeah. Figured it was from you." "It wasn't." They looked at each other, both realizing that someone else had arranged this meeting. Before they could discuss it further, a door opened at the end of the corridor. An older man in civilian clothes emerged, gesturing for them to follow. They entered Unit 7, a small storage space that had been converted into a makeshift office. A desk, 2 chairs, and several filing cabinets occupied the space. The man closed the door and locked it. "My name is Dr. Robert Hamill," he said. "I'm a physicist attached to a research program studying anomalous aerial phenomena in the Nevada test range. What you experienced last night has happened before." Ford and Vega exchanged glances. "How do you know what we experienced?" Ford asked. "Because I've been studying these incidents for 6 years. The pattern is consistent. Lights in the sky, usually in Zone Charlie or adjacent restricted areas. Radio interference, temperature anomalies, and time discrepancies ranging from a few minutes to several hours." "Time discrepancies," Vega repeated. "You're saying people lose time? Not lose. Experience differently. The current working theory is that these objects, whatever they are, create localized distortions in space-time. Within the affected area, time passes at a different rate than the surrounding environment. To you, only seconds passed. To the rest of the world, it was over an hour. Ford felt his stomach turn. That's not possible. Obviously it is. You experienced it. Hamill opened one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a folder. This is the documentation from 11 previous incidents, all in the same general area. 3 of them involved time discrepancies. The others involved equipment malfunctions, unexplained electromagnetic interference, and in 2 cases, physiological effects on personnel. Physiological effects? Vega asked. Temporary paralysis, altered states of consciousness. One witness reported feeling as if their thoughts were being observed. All of these cases have been classified and buried. The official explanations range from equipment malfunction to personnel error to atmospheric phenomena. Why are you telling us this? Ford asked. Hamill met his eyes. Because I believe these phenomena represent something of profound importance. And I believe the official response, which is to classify and suppress, is fundamentally wrong. We should be studying these events, trying to understand them. Instead, we're pretending they don't exist. If you feel that way, why work for the program? Because from the inside, I can document what's really happening. I can preserve evidence that might otherwise be destroyed. And I can try to find other witnesses, people like you, who have experienced these events firsthand. Vega was studying the files. These incidents go back 6 years. Have there been any conclusions about what these objects are? Multiple theories, no consensus. Some researchers believe they're experimental aircraft from a rival nation. Others think they're classified U.S. projects that even we aren't cleared to know about. And a few, myself included, believe they represent something else. Meaning what? Meaning they may not be human in origin. The words hung in the air. Ford wanted to dismiss them as ridiculous, but after what he had experienced, he found he couldn't. Those lights had moved in ways that defied physics. They had created temperature anomalies that violated thermodynamics. They had somehow compressed or expanded time itself. No human technology could do those things. What happens now? Ford asked. You'll be reassigned, as they've already told you. Mr. Vega will be transferred to a different contract. The official record will show nothing unusual about your patrol. The radar data from last night, specifically the 12 minutes during your time discrepancy, has already been erased from the system. How do you know that? Because it's standard procedure. Any data that contradicts the official narrative is removed. It's happened in every previous case. Vega's hands clenched into fists. That's destruction of evidence. That's a cover-up. Yes, it is. And it's been happening for decades, not just here, but at other facilities with similar phenomena. The official position is that these events represent potential security breaches or technological surprises from adversaries. They can't admit ignorance, so they pretend the events don't exist. Hamill pulled out a small digital recorder. I'd like to record your detailed accounts of last night. Every detail you can remember. This recording will be kept secure and separate from any official documentation. Someday, when the classification barriers come down, it will serve as testimony of what really happened. They spent the next hour recounting their experiences. Hamill asked detailed questions, probing for specifics. He was particularly interested in the moment when time jumped, asking them to describe any sensations, thoughts, or perceptions they could recall. There's something else, Vega said near the end. When those lights were close, when they were hovering at low altitude, I felt observed, like something was studying us. I felt that too, Ford admitted, like we were specimens under a microscope. Hamill nodded. That's a common report from witnesses. A sense of being examined or assessed. Some describe it as telepathic communication, though no actual words are exchanged. Others just feel a presence, an intelligence focused on them. Do you believe that? Ford asked. That these objects are controlled by some kind of intelligence? I believe the evidence suggests it. The patterns of movement, the apparent responses to human activity, the way they seem to select specific witnesses, all point to deliberate actions rather than random phenomena. When the recording was complete, Hamill gave them each a phone number. This is a secure line. If you experience anything unusual at your new assignments, if you hear about other incidents, contact me, and do not use military communications. They left the storage unit separately. Ford first, then Vega 10 minutes later. As Ford walked back across the base, the sun setting behind the distant mountains, he felt the weight of what he now knew pressing down on him. He was being forced to carry a truth that could not be officially acknowledged, that would be denied by the very institution he served. 3 days later, Ford received his reassignment orders. He was being transferred to Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, far from Nevada and the restricted zones. The assignment was effective immediately. Paul Vega's contract was terminated 2 days after Ford's departure. He was told his services were no longer required, and that his security clearance for work at the Nevada test range was revoked. No explanation was provided. No discussion was permitted. His time working on classified projects in the desert was simply over. Both men tried to adjust to their new lives, tried to put the incident behind them. But the memory remained vivid, undimmed by time or distance. The 3 spheres of light, the impossible cold, the 12 minutes that had vanished from existence, leaving only the testimony of their watches and the certainty that something beyond understanding had occurred. Ford served out his enlistment at Minot, then left the Air Force in '97. He returned to civilian life, taking a job as a security consultant. He never spoke about what he had experienced in Zone Charlie, honoring the classification order even after leaving the military. But he thought about it often, especially on clear nights when the stars were bright. Vega continued working in the defense industry but stayed away from projects connected to the Nevada test range. He eventually moved to California and took a position with a civilian aerospace company. Like Ford, he kept his silence, though the memory of that night never faded. In 2001, Dr. Robert Hamill died of a heart attack at the age of 63. His research into anomalous aerial phenomena was classified and filed away. The recordings he had made with Ford, Vega, and other witnesses were presumably locked in a vault somewhere, inaccessible to anyone without the highest clearances. The official record of the night of April 6, 1993, showed nothing unusual. Patrol 7 Delta had conducted routine security checks in Restricted Zone Charlie. All sensor stations were operational. No incidents were reported. The 12 minutes of missing radar data were attributed to a technical malfunction, the gap explained away as a system error. But the truth remained, carried by those who had been there. 2 men who had witnessed something impossible. 2 men who had lost 12 minutes of their lives to an encounter with objects that defied physics and challenged every assumption about reality. Years passed. Ford built a quiet life in Colorado, married a woman named Sarah, whom he had met at a security industry conference, had 2 children who grew up skiing the nearby mountains and hiking the trails. He taught them to look up at the stars on clear nights, to appreciate the vastness of the universe, though he never told them why the night sky held such fascination for him. He never told them about the 3 lights that had hung in the Nevada desert, radiating impossible cold. He never told them about the 12 minutes that had vanished from his life, leaving only questions and the weight of unacknowledged truth. His children, Emily and Michael, grew up thinking their father was simply a man who liked astronomy, who enjoyed the quiet of mountain nights. They didn't know he was searching the sky for something he had seen once and could never forget. They didn't know that sometimes, when he stood on the deck and stared upward, he was reliving that moment when reality had fractured, when time itself had proven mutable and strange. Ford worked as a security consultant, advising companies on physical security systems and risk assessment. The work was stable, respectable, far removed from the classified projects and desert patrols of his Air Force years. He was good at it, his military background giving him credibility with clients. But there were moments when he would be reviewing a security plan or conducting a site assessment, and his mind would drift back to Zone Charlie, to that night when all his training and understanding had proven inadequate. Vega remained in California, advancing through the aerospace industry, his expertise in electronic systems making him valuable to multiple companies. He remarried in 2003, a fellow engineer named Lisa who worked in satellite communications. They bought a house in Pasadena, close to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory where Lisa worked. Vega rarely spoke about his years working on classified projects in Nevada. His new wife knew he had worked on defense contracts, but he never shared the details, never violated the non-disclosure agreements he had signed decades earlier. But he thought about it. On clear nights when he would stand in his backyard with his telescope, ostensibly observing Jupiter's moons or Saturn's rings, he would sometimes turn the instrument toward the horizon, searching for movement that defied conventional explanation. He kept detailed logs of his observations, noting anything unusual, anything that reminded him of that night in Zone Charlie. Neither man forgot. Neither man stopped looking up. The incident had marked them in ways that couldn't be erased by time or distance. It had shown them that reality was stranger and more fluid than they had been taught, that the universe held mysteries that official science refused to acknowledge. In 2007, on a Tuesday evening in late March, Ford received an unexpected phone call. He was in his home office reviewing a client proposal when his cell phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something made him pick up. The voice on the other end was older, rougher than he remembered, but familiar in a way that made his breath catch. "This is Paul Vega. I don't know if you remember me." Ford felt his heart rate spike, adrenaline flooding his system as memories rushed back. The desert night, the thermal camera readings, the lights descending, the impossible time jump. 14 years compressed into an instant of recognition. "I remember. It's been 14 years. I need to talk to you. Not over the phone. Can you meet me?" "When?" "Soon. This week, if possible. I know it's sudden, but—" Vega paused, and Ford could hear something in his voice. Urgency. Maybe fear. "Things are happening. Information is starting to come out, and I think we need to compare notes before someone tries to control the narrative." They arranged to meet in Denver, neutral ground far from any military installation. Ford told his wife he had a client meeting, hating the deception but unable to explain the truth. Sarah asked no questions, had learned over their years of marriage that there were parts of her husband's past he couldn't or wouldn't discuss. She kissed him goodbye and told him to drive safely. The drive to Denver took 3 hours. Ford used the time to mentally prepare himself, to organize his memories of that night into something coherent. He had replayed the events so many times over the years that he worried his memory had been corrupted, details added or removed by the passage of time. But the core remained clear. The lights, the cold, the missing time, the sense of being observed by something incomprehensibly other. They met at a hotel near the airport, sitting in a quiet corner of a hotel bar that catered to business travelers. The decor was generic corporate modern, designed to be inoffensive and forgettable. Piped-in jazz played softly through hidden speakers. A few other patrons sat scattered throughout the space, none paying attention to the two middle-aged men discussing matters that no one around them could imagine. Ford almost didn't recognize Vega at first. The engineer had aged, his hair now almost completely gray, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. But when their eyes met, there was instant recognition. Two men who had shared an experience so profound it had changed the trajectory of their lives. They ordered drinks neither would finish and sat studying each other for a long moment. Finally, Ford broke the silence. "You look good. Different, but good." "So do you. Married?" "Yes. 2 kids. You?" "Remarried. No kids, but Lisa has 2 from her first marriage. They're grown now." Vega paused, turning his glass in his hands. "I've thought about calling you 100 times over the years. Always talked myself out of it." "Why now?" "Because I've been contacted," Vega said without preamble, "by others who experienced similar incidents. There's a network, very informal, very quiet. People who worked at the Nevada test range and saw things they couldn't explain. We share information, compare experiences, and the patterns, Ford, the patterns are undeniable." "How many?" Ford asked. "At least 30 that I know of. Probably more who are too afraid to come forward even in this limited way. The experiences vary, but the patterns are consistent. Unidentified objects, time anomalies, equipment malfunctions that can't be explained, and always the official response is denial and classification." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because something's changed. In the last 2 years, several witnesses have gone public. Not about Zone Charlie specifically, but about similar experiences at other locations. The government's response has been different this time, less aggressive. They're not threatening people quite as forcefully as they used to. That doesn't mean it's safe to talk. No, but it means there's a shift happening. The veil of secrecy is starting to crack. And I think maybe it's time for witnesses like us to start preparing our testimony. Not for publication now, but for eventual disclosure." Ford considered this. He had spent 14 years carrying the secret of that night. The weight of it had never lessened, but he had grown accustomed to it, the way one grows accustomed to chronic pain. The idea of possibly someday being able to speak openly about it felt both liberating and terrifying. "What would that look like?" he asked. "Written statements, detailed accounts, documentation that can be preserved and verified. When the time comes, if it comes, we'll have our testimony ready. And if the time never comes?" Vega shrugged. "Then at least we'll have told the truth, even if only to each other. At least we'll have preserved the record." Ford agreed. Over the following months, he wrote down everything he remembered about that night in Zone Charlie. Every detail, every sensation, every moment of the experience. He described the lights, the time jump, the debriefing, the forced reassignment. He dated it, signed it, and sealed it in an envelope with instructions that it be opened only after his death or after official disclosure of similar incidents, whichever came first. Paul Vega did the same, his engineer's precision bringing technical detail to his account that complemented Ford's more experiential narrative. Between the two testimonies, a complete picture emerged of what had occurred that night, a picture that contradicted the official record, but captured the truth as they had lived it. In 2017, the New York Times published an article about a Pentagon program that investigated UFO sightings. The article included video footage from Navy pilots encountering unidentified aerial objects that demonstrated flight characteristics similar to what Ford and Vega had witnessed. The objects moved without visible propulsion, made impossible maneuvers, and defied the laws of physics as currently understood. Ford watched the news coverage with a mixture of vindication and frustration. Here, finally, was public acknowledgement that these phenomena existed. But the discussion remained limited, carefully controlled. The possibility that these objects represented non-human intelligence was mentioned but not seriously explored. The official position remained one of cautious curiosity rather than genuine investigation. He called Vega. "Did you see the Times article?" "Yeah, it's a start. But notice what they're not saying. They're acknowledging the objects exist, but they're framing it as a potential security threat from Russia or China. They're still not willing to consider the alternative. Maybe they can't. Maybe the truth is too disruptive. Or maybe they've known the truth for decades and they're trying to figure out how to disclose it without causing panic." The conversation stayed with Ford. He thought about the night in Zone Charlie, about those 3 spheres of light that had hung in the darkness like lanterns from another dimension. He thought about the 12 missing minutes, time that had been stolen or compressed or experienced differently. He thought about the temperature anomalies that violated thermodynamics and the sense of being observed by an intelligence utterly foreign to human experience. And he wondered if humanity was ready for that truth. If society could handle the knowledge that we share our world, our skies, with something else. Something that operates by rules we don't understand and possesses capabilities we can't match. In 2019, more military witnesses came forward, describing encounters with unidentified objects. Navy pilots spoke on camera about their experiences. Radar operators confirmed anomalous returns. The stigma that had long surrounded these reports began to erode, replaced by serious discussion in mainstream media and halls of government. Ford received another call from Vega. "There's going to be hearings, congressional hearings. They're talking about declassifying some of the documentation. Will they mention Zone Charlie? I doubt it. That's probably still buried under classification levels we can't imagine. But the fact that they're holding hearings at all represents a massive shift. Should we come forward?" There was a long pause. Then Vega said, "I don't know. Part of me wants to finally tell the truth publicly, to have it acknowledged, but another part," he trailed off, "is afraid," Ford finished. "Yeah, afraid of the consequences. Afraid of not being believed. Afraid that coming forward will accomplish nothing except ruining what's left of our lives." Ford understood. They had both built careers, families, lives in the years since Zone Charlie. Coming forward meant risking all of that for uncertain gain. The classification orders they had signed were likely still in effect, meaning they could face prosecution for speaking publicly. And even if they avoided legal consequences, the social cost could be devastating. Being labeled as UFO witnesses, cranks, attention seekers. The burden of truth-telling is often borne by those least able to afford it. "We keep our statements sealed," Ford decided, "for now. Let the official process play out. If they genuinely move toward disclosure, if they start acknowledging what we know to be true, then maybe we add our voices, but not yet." Agreed. In 2021, a government report was released acknowledging that military personnel had encountered aerial objects they could not identify or explain. The report was heavily qualified, full of careful language and hedged conclusions. But it represented official acknowledgement that something was happening in our skies, something beyond our current understanding. Ford read the report with a weary recognition. Yes, unidentified objects existed. Yes, they demonstrated unusual flight characteristics. Yes, they represented a potential security concern. All true. All carefully worded to avoid the larger implications. What the report didn't say, what it couldn't say, was that these objects represented intelligence. that they interacted with human observers in ways that suggested purpose and awareness, that they could manipulate time and space in ways that defied our physics, that they had been doing this for decades, perhaps centuries, and that every layer of official secrecy had been built not to protect national security, but to avoid confronting a truth too vast and strange to easily accommodate. Ford was 74 now, retired from the security consulting business he had run for 2 decades. He spent his days in a small house overlooking the Colorado mountains, a modest ranch-style home he and Sarah had bought 10 years earlier when they decided to downsize. His children were grown, pursuing their own lives. Emily worked as a teacher in Denver, married with a son of her own. Michael had followed his father into security work, though he specialized in cybersecurity rather than physical systems. Ford's wife of 40 years still sat beside him on the deck most evenings, reading or working on her tablet while he watched the sky. Sarah knew something had happened to her husband during his Air Force years, something he couldn't or wouldn't discuss. She had stopped asking about it years ago, recognizing that some doors remain closed for reasons beyond stubbornness or secrecy. She saw the way he looked at the night sky, the intensity of his gaze, the way he would sometimes tense when aircraft flew overhead. She saw the nightmares he occasionally suffered, waking in the dark with his heart racing, though he could never remember the dreams that caused them. She accepted these mysteries as part of the man she loved, the way one accepts a partner's old scars without needing to know the exact circumstances of each injury. What mattered was that he had come home to her every night for 40 years, that he had been a good father to their children, that he had built a life with her despite whatever shadows haunted him from his past. He had built a good life, Ford thought, as he sat on his deck watching another sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. A normal life, or as normal as possible for someone who carried the weight of that one extraordinary night. He had provided for his family, paid his mortgage, attended his children's school events and sports games. He had been present for birthdays and holidays, anniversaries and graduations. He had done all the ordinary things that people do to build a life worth living. But beneath that ordinary surface, the memory remained. The 3 spheres of light hanging in the Nevada darkness. The impossible cold radiating from objects that shouldn't exist. The 12 minutes stolen from his life. Time that had passed for the rest of the world but vanished from his experience. And the sense, overwhelming and undeniable, that something utterly alien had examined him that night, had assessed him with an intelligence so different from human consciousness that even calling it intelligence felt inadequate. Sometimes, on clear evenings when the mountain air was particularly crisp and the stars seemed close enough to touch, he would sit on his deck and watch the sky with methodical attention, looking for lights that moved wrong, for objects that hung too still, for any sign that what he had witnessed decades ago was still out there, still operating in the shadows of official denial. He had purchased a good telescope years ago, ostensibly for amateur astronomy, but really as a tool for his ongoing search. And sometimes, just sometimes, he would see something. A light moving against the wind pattern, maintaining steady course when weather should have pushed it off track. A star that flickered with apparent purpose rather than atmospheric distortion, pulsing in a rhythm too regular to be natural. A presence in the sky that suggested the mystery was not solved, was not even close to being solved. On those occasions he would watch until the anomaly disappeared, then return inside and add a note to the journal he still kept. Decades of observations documenting a pattern that official science refused to acknowledge. Paul Vega passed away in 2022 at the age of 71. Cancer took him, relatively quickly at the end. Before he died, he reached out to Ford one last time. "Make sure the statement gets released," Vega said, his voice weak over the phone. "After I'm gone, make sure someone knows what we saw." "I will," Ford promised. I'll make sure the truth survives us." Vega's testimony was released to a small group of researchers after his death, per his instructions. It was added to a growing collection of witness statements, a mosaic of experiences that together painted a picture of something profound and disturbing. Objects in our skies that we couldn't explain. Encounters that defied physics. Time anomalies that suggested reality was far stranger than our science acknowledged. The researchers received Vega's account with serious interest. They corroborated details with other witnesses, matched his technical descriptions to similar reports from other locations. They confirmed that on the night of April 6, 1993, radar systems in the Nevada test range had indeed shown a 12-minute gap in data, officially attributed to system malfunction but timing exactly with the period Vega and Ford had lost. The truth was documented. The evidence existed. All that remained was for the world to be ready to hear it. Lucas Ford is still alive, as of this writing, living quietly in Colorado. He has not spoken publicly about his experience in Zone Charlie, still honoring the classification order he signed 30 years ago. But his statement exists, sealed and dated, ready to be released when the time comes. He still watches the sky, still looks for lights that move with impossible precision, still carries the memory of those 12 minutes that vanished, of the 3 spheres glowing cold in the darkness, of the sense that something vast and incomprehensible was observing him. The official record says nothing unusual happened in Restricted Zone Charlie on April 6, 1993. Just a routine patrol, routine checks, routine reports. The 12-minute data gap is explained as equipment malfunction. The radar anomalies are attributed to atmospheric interference. The witness reports are buried under classification so deep that most people with security clearances don't even know they exist. But the truth remains, carried by those who were there. Written down in detailed statements. Preserved in the memories of men who know what they saw, who lived through an experience that changed their understanding of reality. Somewhere in the Nevada desert, restricted zone. Charlie continues its classified operations. Sensors monitor the air and ground. Patrols drive through the darkness, checking equipment, maintaining security. And occasionally, usually at night, lights appear in the sky. Lights that move wrong. Lights that radiate cold instead of heat. Lights that seem to bend the very fabric of space-time around them. The personnel who witness these events are debriefed, warned to silence, and often reassigned. The official reports are sanitized, the truth buried beneath layers of classification, and the cycle continues, year after year, decade after decade. But the witnesses remain. Some speak in whispers to researchers willing to listen. Others take their secrets to the grave. And a few, like Lucas Ford, write their testimony and seal it away, trusting that someday, somehow, the truth will emerge. The night sky holds mysteries we have barely begun to acknowledge, let alone understand. In the remote corners of the Nevada test range, in the restricted zones where questions are discouraged and curiosity is a liability, something extraordinary continues to happen. Objects appear that should not exist. Time behaves in ways it should not behave. Reality itself seems to flex and warp around phenomena that our science cannot explain. And scattered across the country, now aging, are the men and women who have witnessed these things, who have stood in the darkness and watched the impossible unfold before them, who have lost time, lost certainty, lost the comfortable assumption that we understand our world. They carry the truth. They wait for the day when that truth can finally be spoken aloud without consequence, without denial, without the weight of official secrecy pressing down upon it. Until then, the lights continue to appear. The time continues to slip and jump. and the desert keeps its secrets, vast and silent under the stars. Restricted Zone. Charlie, 0411. The moment when two men discovered that time could be stolen, that reality was more fluid than they had ever imagined, that we share our skies with something beyond our current comprehension. A moment that was documented, classified, and officially forgotten, but not by those who were there, never by those who were there.